"You don't even know me," Emily whispered, blood on her lips, her voice barely a thread in the freezing desert air. Iron Jack looked at her, this broken girl who had thrown herself between him and four men with rage in their eyes and steel-toed boots, and said something she would carry for the rest of her life. "I know exactly who you are. You're the only person in this whole damn town who gave a damn. If you've never had a single soul in your corner, this story will find you." Before we go further, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The diner closed at 10. That was the rule, the only rule that mattered to Emily Parker, because 10 o'clock was when the back door unlocked from the outside, and she could slip in through the service corridor to use the bathroom sink before Darlene the night cleaner pretended not to see her. Darlene always pretended not to see her. It was a kindness wrapped in plausible deniability, the sort of mercy that existed in towns like Prescott Valley, mostly in the dark, mostly between people who had nothing to offer each other except the quiet agreement not to cause more pain. Emily was 19 years old. She had been 19 for 4 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. She knew this not because she celebrated birthdays. She hadn't celebrated one since she was 14, the last one her mother remembered before the pills took over her memory entirely, but because she counted. She counted because counting was something solid in a life that had become entirely liquid. Numbers didn't lie, numbers didn't leave. You could hold on to numbers when everything else slipped through your fingers. She lived behind the diner in a space between the dumpster and the cinder block wall that she had lined with 2 moving blankets and a folded tarp she'd pulled from a construction site 3 blocks east. She had a backpack. In it, 1 change of clothes, a half-used bar of soap, a library card she couldn't use because you needed an address to check out books, a photograph of her and her mother taken at a gas station photo booth when Emily was 7, both of them making ridiculous faces, and $31.40 in crumpled bills and loose change. $31.40 was her entire net worth. She knew this too. Prescott Valley in January was not forgiving. The Sonoran Desert had this cruelty about it. People who'd never been assumed desert meant heat, meant endless, scorching sun, and in summer that was true enough to kill you. But winter nights dropped to the 20s, sometimes below, and the wind off the plateau came in like something personally offended. Emily had learned in her first winter on the streets that cold killed faster than hunger. Hunger made you weak. Cold made you stupid, then slow, then still. She'd been on her own for 14 months. The story of how she got there was not complicated. It was only painful. Her mother, Diane Parker, had been fighting addiction since before Emily was born, fighting and losing and fighting again, in that exhausting cycle that wore everyone around it down to bone. Emily had spent most of her childhood in the gap between Diane's good stretches and her bad ones, learning to read the signs. The particular way her mother's eyes went soft around the edges. The shift in her laugh from real to perform the mornings Emily would find her on the bathroom floor and have to decide at 10, at 11, at 12 whether this was sleep or something worse. At 17, Emily had called Child Protective Services herself, not on her mother, on herself. She told them she wasn't safe. She told them she needed somewhere to go. What followed was 18 months of group homes, 2 foster placements that fell apart, one that she left because of what the foster father did when his wife worked night shifts, and finally a transitional housing program for aging out youth that ran out of funding before she aged all the way out. The day she turned 18, she was handed $40, a list of resources, and a goodbye. The resources didn't pan out. The resources never panned out the way the list implied they would. So she learned the town. She learned which churches gave food on which days, which gas stations had attendants who looked away when you used the bathroom, which neighborhoods put recyclables in the blue bins early enough that she could collect them before the trucks came. She learned which people would call the cops and which would just walk past faster. She learned the diner and Darlene. She learned the space behind the dumpster. She learned invisibility like a second language. And she was good at it. She had gotten so good at it that most nights she made it from one end of the day to the other without a single person making real eye contact with her. People in Prescott Valley were not particularly cruel, she had decided. They were busy. They were tired. They had their own problems, their own pain, their own counting to do. Seeing her would require them to do something about what they saw, and most people couldn't afford that. So they didn't see her. She understood it. She didn't forgive it. She understood it. The night of January the 14th started the same way all her nights started. She collected her day, a lunch counter stool at the church on Glassford Hill Road, where Pastor Mendez's wife Maria always made sure there was extra soup, a 2-hour sit in the public library, until the security guard's shift changed and the new one started being less friendly, 4 hours in a laundromat on Robert Road, where the owner, a small Vietnamese man named Mr. Phan, let her sit as long as she bought one wash cycle for 75 cents. She spent the 75 cents. She washed her one change of clothes and sat in the plastic chair with her eyes closed and let the machine's rhythm move through the floor into her bones. By 9:30, she was back on Glassford Hill Road headed toward the diner. That was when she heard it. Not words at first. Sound. The particular texture of sound that her body recognized before her mind caught up the thud and grunt of violence, the sharp intake of breath that meant someone was taking hits, the uglier sound underneath the laughter. Because there were people laughing. That was always the worst part she had found. The violence itself was bad. The laughter was what made it evil. She stopped walking. She should not stop walking. She knew this. Every piece of survival wisdom she'd accumulated over 14 months on the streets told her the same thing. Keep moving, don't witness, don't become part of someone else's problem. Witnesses became targets. Targets didn't sleep safely behind dumpsters. She knew all of this, and she stopped anyway because the sound was coming from the far end of the parking lot behind Rosario's Bar and Grill, and even in the dark, even from 40 feet away, she could see enough. 4 of them. Young, she'd clocked them later, much later, as 19 to 23, though in the moment they seemed ageless in the way that cruelty makes people ageless. They were dressed well. That was the first thing she registered. These were not desperate people. The boots were expensive. The jackets were clean. One of them wore a watch that caught the parking lot light with the kind of gleam that only real metal makes. These were boys who came from somewhere warm, somewhere padded, somewhere that had never required them to count their change. The man on the ground was not young. He was maybe 60, maybe a little past it, with a gray beard and the build of someone who had once been very strong and still carried the ghost of that strength in his shoulders. He wore a black leather vest over a flannel shirt, and even from here, she could see the patch on the back white background. Red letters, the name she'd heard before everybody in Arizona had heard before. He'd been on a motorcycle. She could see the bike on its side 10 feet from him, one wheel still slowly turning like it hadn't gotten the message yet that everything had stopped. He was trying to get up. That was what got her. Not that he was down, she'd seen people down. It was that he kept trying. Every time he got one arm under himself, one of them kicked it out. They were making a game of it. The one with the expensive watch was laughing hardest, saying something she couldn't fully make out, something about old men and their toys. And his voice had that particular quality, bright and certain, the voice of someone who had never in his life done a thing without being sure he'd get away with it. Emily stood at the edge of that parking lot for what felt like a very long time and was probably 4 seconds. She thought about the $31.40. She thought about the photograph in her backpack. She thought about 14 months of being invisible and how invisibility was a form of safety and also a form of disappearing, and how those two things were not the same even if they felt like it. She walked forward. "Hey!" Her voice came out louder than she expected, sharp enough that all 4 of them turned. "Hey, stop!" The laughter didn't stop immediately. It took a beat, the way laughter does when it's been interrupted by something too small to register as a real threat. Then one of them, the tallest one, thick through the shoulders with a jaw that looked like it had been constructed specifically to make other people feel smaller, turned fully toward her, and she got her first good look at his face. He was handsome in the way that some dangerous things are handsome, clean lines. Easy confidence, the particular beauty of someone who had always been told he was exceptional. "Walk away, sweetheart," he said. It wasn't aggressive yet. It was dismissive, which was almost worse. She was so small a problem, she didn't even rate aggression. "I said stop." She was still walking. Her legs were doing this on their own at some point. She had lost direct command of them, somewhere between her survival instincts screaming at her to run and something older, something deeper, pulling her forward. "He's not fighting back. He's on the ground. Stop." "You know who you're talking to." The one with the watch had a different voice up close, smoother, more practiced, like he'd taken a class in sounding reasonable while doing unreasonable things. He was looking at her with the focused curiosity of someone who had just noticed an insect walking across a table. "You have any idea who my father is? I don't care who your father is." That got a reaction. Not from the one with the watch, from the tall one who laughed again, but differently this time, something darker in it. She doesn't care, he said, looking at his friends like she'd done a trick. Look at this. She doesn't care. The man on the ground used their distraction. He got one arm under himself, two started to rise. Emily moved without thinking, crossing the last 15 feet between her and him and dropping to one knee beside him. And she was reaching for his arm. She was trying to help him up, and she got maybe 2 seconds of that before one of the four grabbed her by the back of her jacket and threw her. She'd been thrown before. She knew what falling felt like, the sudden wrongness of not being on the ground and then being on it too fast, the way the impact travels up through your hands and elbows and into your shoulders. She knew how to land badly. She hit the asphalt on her left side, her backpack taking some of the impact, and lay still for a moment while everything recalibrated. Stay down, the tall one said. Not angry yet, still amused. She got up. It was the thing she would not be able to explain later. Not to the hospital staff, not to Iron Jack, not to herself in the quiet moments that came after. She got it up because getting up was all she knew how to do. 14 months of being knocked down by circumstances, by systems, by the slow grind of a world that had decided she didn't matter. She had gotten up every single time, not out of heroism, not out of strategy, but because the alternative was staying down, and staying down was dying by degrees, and she was not finished yet. She didn't know what she wasn't finished with. She just wasn't finished. I said, stay down. The amusement was going now. She could hear it, leaving his voice replaced by something flatter and colder. No, she said. He hit her. Not with a fist, with his open palm, hard across the side of her face, the kind of hit meant to humiliate more than injure, to demonstrate the size of the gap between what he was and what she was. Her head snapped sideways. Her ear rang. She tasted copper. She did not fall. She stood there, her ear ringing, blood beginning to gather at the corner of her mouth, and she looked at him with eyes that had seen too much to show him the fear she felt, the fear that was very real and very large and very much present, and she said quietly, clearly, "You're going to have to do better than that." He did. She didn't remember all of it. Memory works that way with certain kinds of pain. The brain performs a small mercy, editing the footage, leaving gaps. What she remembered hitting the ground again, this time harder, her right knee taking the impact wrong. A boot against her ribs. Not a kick exactly, more of a shove with his foot, like she was something he wanted moved rather than something he was trying to destroy. The expensive watch catching the light as the arm it was attached to reached down and grabbed her backpack off her back. Her backpack with the $31.40 and the photograph and the soap. "You want to be a hero," the one with the watch said, and his voice was very close, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "This is what heroes look like." And then they were walking away. All four of them, unhurried, easy in their bodies the way people are easy when they have never had real consequences, when consequence has always been something that happened to other people. She lay on the cold asphalt and breathed. Next to her, a hand, heavy, rough, trembling slightly, the old biker making it to his knees. She could hear his breathing, ragged, effortful, the breathing of someone in real pain, but refusing to let the pain win. "You okay?" he said. She almost laughed. She almost laughed because he was asking her, and he was the one who'd been on the ground before she got there, and she was 19 years old on the asphalt of a bar parking lot with blood in her mouth and her backpack gone, and he was asking her. "I've had worse nights," she said. "Name's Jack Donahue." He got himself upright, wincing hard. "People call me Iron Jack." "Emily." "Emily what?" "Parker." He reached down and she took his hand, and he pulled her to her feet with more strength than she expected from someone who'd just been beaten in a parking lot. Up close, he was more solid than she'd realized, weathered but anchored the way old desert trees are anchored, roots deeper than anyone suspects from looking at the surface. His face was bleeding at the brow. His left eye was swelling shut. He looked at her with the right one clear and gray and absolutely present. "You stepped in," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." Why, she thought about it for a real second. Not the easy answer, not the automatic answer, but the true one. "I don't know," she said finally. I couldn't not." Iron Jack nodded slowly, like she'd said something that required that level of consideration. "Where's your people?" "I don't have people." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his bike on the ground, the one wheel that had finally stopped spinning. He looked at the parking lot empty now, the bar's neon sign buzzing its indifferent red and blue behind them. He looked back at her. You got somewhere to be tonight, somewhere warm. I've got a spot. Is it inside? She didn't answer, which was its own answer. He didn't push. He just nodded again, that slow, considered nod. I need to make a call, he said. Can you stay put for 5 minutes? She could have said no. She could have taken her leave, walked back to her spot behind the dumpster, pressed the cold night around herself like a blanket, and let this dissolve into just another strange thing that had happened in a series of strange things. She should have said no, probably. Her survival logic said no. Sure, she said. He found his phone in his jacket pocket. It had survived the beating, barely the screen cracked but still lit, and he stepped away from her. Not far, 10 feet facing the parking lot, she heard him dial. She heard it ring once, twice. She heard the answer. It's Jack, he said. Then after a pause, I need you to listen. I'm fine. I'm going to be fine. But something happened tonight that you need to hear about. She couldn't hear the other voice. She watched him talk. She watched the way he stood straight-backed, even now. Even hurt, the way certain people carry their bodies like a statement they've been making their whole lives without ever choosing to. She thought about the 4 boys walking away easy in the dark, and the one with the watch, and the way he'd said this is what heroes look like. She thought about the photograph in her backpack that was gone, now the only photograph she'd had of herself and her mother before everything broke. She sat down on the curb and held her ribs and breathed. Iron Jack came back 5 minutes later, his phone in his pocket, moving with the careful deliberateness of a man taking inventory of his damage. He sat down next to her on the curb, uninvited, but not unwelcome. And for a moment, they were just 2 people on an asphalt curb in the cold breathing. You need a doctor, he said. I'm fine. You're not fine. Your lip is split and you're holding your ribs. They're bruised, not broken. I know the difference. He looked at her sideways. You know the difference between bruised and broken ribs? I've had both. He was quiet for a moment. How old are you? 19. Christ, he said, not as a curse, as something else. It's fine, she said, because she always said it was fine, because saying it was fine was the only way to keep moving. I'm fine. This is just a night. I've had bad nights. I'll be okay. Emily. His voice had changed. It had gone quieter but heavier, the way certain voices do when the person behind them decides to mean what they're saying. Look at me. She looked at him. Those boys, he said. Do you know who they are? The one with the watch said something about his father. His name is Tyler Bradford. His father is Garrett Bradford. He watched her face. You know that name, should I? In this town, yeah, you should. Garrett Bradford owns half the commercial real estate in Prescott Valley. He's on the city council. He's been on it for 11 years. He's one of those men who's figured out how to make the whole town work for him without anyone being able to point to the specific moment they agreed to that arrangement. Iron Jack paused. Tyler and his friends, they run around doing what they want because no one has ever told them they can't. No one's ever made it stick. Emily absorbed this. So what I did tonight doesn't matter. They're going to get away with it. They always have before. Great. She was not surprised. She was not even particularly angry. She was just tired in the deep, specific way she'd been tired for months. The tiredness of someone who has seen the world work this way so many times that the confirmation landed less like a blow and more like the 47th page of a book she'd already read. So what do we do? Iron Jack reached into his vest pocket and produced a card. Plain white minimal, just a phone number handwritten in blue ink. He held it out to her. You call that number, he said, day or night. You call it, you tell whoever answers that Jack Donahue gave you this number, and you tell them what you told me, where you're sleeping, what you need, you understand. She took the card and looked at it. Who answers? People I trust. Why would they help me? They don't know me. They'll know you help me. He looked at her steadily. That's enough. That's all it takes. She wanted to believe him. She found sitting on that curb with blood drying on her lip and her ribs aching and the cold working its way through her layers that some part of her, the part that had not yet been fully extinguished, the part that had put the card in her pocket after every setback and disaster and collected it back up and kept going, that part wanted badly to believe him. I don't need charity, she said. Old reflex. Automatic. It's not charity. His voice was entirely level. It's a debt. You stepped in front of four men to help someone you didn't know. The world owes you something for that. I'm just making sure it pays. She put the card in her pocket. He insisted on waiting with her until she was safely back behind the diner. She told him 3 times it wasn't necessary. He walked with her anyway, moving slowly because of his ribs not saying much just there. When they reached the dumpster in the wall and the space she'd made into something that wasn't quite shelter, but was the closest thing she had, he looked at it without comment, without pity, which she would have hated. He just looked. "I'll get someone here in the morning," he said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He left her there. She listened to his footsteps move away across the alley slower than they should have been, and she listened to the silence after, and she lay down on her moving blankets and pulled the tarp over herself and stared up at the crack of sky between the dumpster and the wall. The cold came in around the edges of everything. She didn't sleep for a long time. She was thinking about the card in her pocket, the one with the phone number in blue ink. She was thinking about what Iron Jack had said. It's a debt. She had spent 14 months accumulating a different kind of debt to the system, to the church soup kitchens, to Darlene at the diner, who pretended not to see her debts. She could never pay favors. She could never return kindnesses that left her feeling smaller because she had no reciprocal currency. This was different. He was saying she'd given something. He was saying what she'd done had value. She didn't know if she believed that yet, but she kept the card. At 11:47 p.m., Iron Jack made it to his bike, righted it with considerable effort and considerable pain, and drove it slowly to a parking lot 2 blocks from Yavapai Regional Medical Center, where he sat for a moment in the cold and breathed and took stock. 3 cracked ribs. Maybe he'd had cracked ribs before he knew the architecture of that pain. His left eye was closing. His lip needed stitches he probably wasn't going to get. His hands, when he held them up, were trembling slightly, but that was adrenaline leaving the body, not fear. He knew the difference. He made 4 phone calls. The first was to a man named Ruiz, his road captain, who answered on the second ring because Ruiz always answered on the second ring, day or night, a reliability that Iron Jack had come to regard as one of the fixed points of the universe. "Talk to me," Ruiz said. 4 men in the parking lot behind Rosario's. Well-dressed, young. The ringleader is Tyler Bradford, Garrett Bradford's kid. A pause. "They hit you." "They hit me. More importantly, they hit a girl who stepped in to help me. Homeless kid, 19 years old, sleeping behind the diner on Glassford Hill Road. She's got nothing. She threw herself in front of it anyway." Another pause, this one longer. "How bad?" "She says bruised ribs, split lip. They took her backpack. Everything she had was in it." Ruiz's voice, when it came back, was quiet and completely controlled, the way Ruiz's voice always got when he was feeling something large. "What do you need?" "Put it on the board," Iron Jack said. "Tonight, I want everyone to know by morning." "Done." And Ruiz, he paused, looking at the medical center's lights in the distance. "This girl, she has nobody. I want someone there when she wakes up. She's in the hospital. She should be. She's not going to go on her own. Send someone to the diner on Glassford Hill, the back, and get her seen to whether she argues or not. You know she's going to argue. She's been taking care of herself for a year with nothing. She's going to argue everything. Send someone patient. I'll send Maya." "Good call." He made the second call to the chapter president. He made the third call to a man he knew in Flagstaff, and the fourth to a contact in Phoenix, not to give specific instructions, but to start the water moving. Some information travels best when it starts moving before the full picture is clear. By the time the full picture was clear, you wanted the water already running. Then he went into the emergency room and waited 3 hours to see a doctor about his ribs. While he waited, he thought about Emily Parker, about the way she'd gotten up after being thrown down, about the way she'd said, "I know the difference between bruised and broken ribs, 19 years old," with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who'd had time and experience to learn it. About the things she'd said when he asked her why she stepped in, I couldn't not. He had known a lot of people in his 61 years. He had known people who were brave because they calculated the odds and liked them, and people who were brave because someone was watching, and people who were brave because they wanted the story of being brave. He had known very few people who were brave because their bodies simply moved toward the thing that needed doing before their mind could object. She was one of those. You could see it in the way she stood, even hurt, even frightened, not performing courage, not even entirely aware she was demonstrating it, just standing in the direction of what she believed. The ER doctor told him 2 ribs were fractured and 1 was cracked, and he needed to take it easy for 6 weeks, which Iron Jack received the same way he received most medical advice, with the polite attention of someone who had no intention of following it. He drove home at 3 a.m. and sat in his kitchen and drank black coffee and opened his laptop and typed the name Garrett Bradford into the county property records database and spent an hour reading. By 4 a.m., he had sent a message to Ruiz that read simply, "Bradford is more connected than I knew. This needs to be handled carefully." Ruiz replied 40 minutes later. Noted. Also, the word is already moving. Phoenix knows. Tucson knows. More are asking. Iron Jack set down his coffee cup. He thought about Tyler Bradford's voice in that parking lot. "You have any idea who my father is?" The confidence of it, the certainty that the name was a force field, that it made the world arrange itself around his comfort. He had heard that certainty in voices before. He had watched the world rearrange itself around men like that his entire life. He thought about Emily Parker lying on the curb telling him she'd had worse nights. He typed back to Ruiz, "Let it move." The morning came in hard and clear, the way desert mornings come in no gradual warming, just a sudden shift from black to pale gray to blinding light, as if the sun had no patience for transitions. Emily woke with her ribs stiffened overnight into a different kind of pain, tighter and more insistent, and she lay still for a minute, doing the assessment she always did: what hurts? How bad? What does it prevent? What can be worked around? The ribs were bad, but workable. The knee was stiff. Her lip had sealed overnight the way small cuts do, and the left side of her face ached in a low, diffuse way that would probably fade by afternoon. Her backpack was gone. That was the real damage, the damage that had shape and weight. 3140 was replaceable in theory, painful in practice. The soap was $2. The library card was a walk to the library. The photograph was not replaceable. She sat with that for a moment, the way you sit with the specific grief of losing something irreplaceable. Not the crashing grief, just the quiet one, the one that settles into the space where the thing used to be. She heard footsteps at 7:15 a.m. She heard them before she saw anything steady, unhurried female comfortable in the alley, in a way that said this was someone who was not afraid of where she was. Emily sat up and pulled herself together, which was mostly about her face, about making sure her expression said competent and fine and not requiring assistance. A woman came around the corner of the dumpster, mid-40s, brown-skinned, dark hair, pulled back, wearing a leather jacket with the same patch Emily had seen on Iron Jack's vest the night before. She had kind eyes and a no-nonsense mouth, and she was carrying 2 coffees in a paper bag that smelled like breakfast. "Emily Parker," she said. "Who's asking?" "My name is Maya Reyes. Jack called me." She held out one of the coffees. "He said you'd argue." "I'm not arguing." "You were about to." Maya set the bag down and sat on the edge of the concrete barrier that bordered the alley, making herself small and non-threatening in the practiced way of someone who had done this before. "He told me what happened last night." "I'm fine." "He said you'd say that too." Maya nodded at the coffee still extended. "It's black. Jack said you seemed like a black coffee person." Emily took the coffee. "He also said you lost your backpack. Everything in it." "It's fine." Maya opened the paper bag and produced 2 breakfast burritos wrapped in foil, set one on the concrete next to Emily and kept the other for herself. "There was a photograph in it," she said conversationally, not looking directly at Emily. "Jack mentioned it." "He mentioned the photograph. He mentioned you'd probably be upset about the photograph. He's observant for a man." She took a bite of her burrito. "He can't get it back, but there might be ways to track down copies if the photo was taken commercially. Photo booth pictures sometimes survive in the chain's database. It's worth trying." Emily looked at the burrito next to her and looked at the coffee in her hands and looked at this woman sitting on the concrete barrier eating breakfast. Like this was perfectly ordinary. Like showing up to an alley behind a diner to sit with a homeless 19-year-old was just a thing she did on Tuesday mornings. "Why are you here?" Emily said, not hostile, genuine. Maya looked at her directly for the first time. Her eyes were very steady. "Because you stepped in last night when you didn't have to. Because Jack asked me to come, and when Jack asks, I come. And because," she paused, choosing her words in a way that felt careful and real. Because someone should have been showing up for you for a while now, and we're late, and I'm sorry about that, but I'm here now. Emily's throat did something she was not going to allow. She made it stop. She picked up the burrito and unwrapped it and took a bite, and it was warm and good and tasted like real food, the kind of food that had been made with actual care, and she ate it and drank her black coffee and did not let her throat do what it wanted to do. He said something about people coming, Emily said when she had herself back together. This morning, he said he'd send someone. He sent me. Maya folded her foil neatly. I'm going to take you to a clinic, not a hospital, a clinic. Dr. Vasquez's practice on Miller Valley Road. She's a friend. She'll look at your ribs and your knee and make sure nothing's worse than it seems. Then we're going to figure out the next step. I don't have insurance. Jack's handling the bill. I know you don't want charity. Maya's voice was gentle but final, the voice of someone who has heard that sentence many times and has decided to move past it efficiently. It's not charity, I told you. It's a debt. You take the coffee, you take the clinic, you take what comes next, and then someday when you're on your feet, you find someone who needs it and you pass it forward. That's how it works. That's always how it's worked. You understand me? Emily looked at her for a long moment. Okay, she said. Good. Maya stood up and dusted off her jacket. We'll take my truck. Can you walk okay? I can walk fine. Then let's go. Emily picked up her empty coffee cup and looked at the space behind the dumpster. The moving blankets, the tarp, the specific arrangement of survival that she had built over weeks. She would need to come back for the blankets. She might not be coming back at all depending on what the next step was. She didn't know yet. She stood in that particular uncertainty and breathed it in, and then she followed Maya Reyes out of the alley and into the sharp desert morning. Behind her 217 miles south in Phoenix, a phone buzzed on a nightstand. A man named Cole Garrett, not related to the Bradford family despite the coincidental shared name, which was a coincidence he had never found funny, rolled over and read the message from his chapter president and sat up in the dark. He read it twice. Then he picked up his phone and started making calls. It was 7:32 in the morning. The day had barely started, and already something was moving through the network. Something that didn't have a name yet. Something that traveled faster than information and slower than fire. Something that felt to the men and women receiving those early calls like the particular electricity in the air before a storm. 2 hours later, Emily Parker was sitting in a clinic chair, having her ribs assessed by Dr. Vasquez, who confirmed 3 bruised and 1 cracked and told her to rest, which Emily received with the same polite attention Iron Jack had given the emergency room. Doctor's instructions, the attention of someone taking the information in while already rearranging it for practical reality. In the clinic waiting room, Maya Reyes sat with her phone and read the incoming messages and felt something happen in her chest that she recognized but didn't often name. It was the specific feeling of a thing being set in motion that was larger than anyone had quite planned. It was the feeling of a response beginning to take shape out of pieces that were individually small and collectively unstoppable. She typed a reply to Ruiz, how many? His response came back in 2 minutes. She looked at the number. She looked at it again. She put her phone in her pocket and looked at the wall and thought about a 19-year-old girl throwing herself between a man and 4 expensive boots in a dark parking lot for no reason except that she couldn't not. Some things you set in motion. Some things set themselves. Outside the clinic windows, the Arizona desert stretched hard and pale under the winter sun, and somewhere on the highways threading through it, engines were turning over. The sound was still too far away to hear, but it was coming. Maya drove like she talked direct. No wasted movement, no unnecessary explanation. Emily sat in the passenger seat of the truck with her hands in her lap and watched the town move past the window and tried to calculate what was happening to her life. She had spent 14 months making herself small enough to survive inside the cracks of a system that had decided she didn't exist. In the last 12 hours, she had been beaten in a parking lot, sat on a curb with a man named Iron Jack who bled on the asphalt and spoke to her like she mattered, and was now in a truck being driven somewhere by a woman in a Hells Angels jacket who brought her coffee and breakfast burritos and called her loss a debt. She didn't have a framework for this. She had a lot of frameworks for cold nights and hunger and invisibility and the specific arithmetic of $31 stretched across a week. She did not have one for this. "You're thinking too hard," Maya said without looking at her. "I'm not thinking anything." "You've been staring at the door handle for 4 minutes. That's thinking." Emily looked away from the door handle. "Where are we going after the clinic?" "Depends on what Vasquez says." "I'm telling you, it's bruised ribs and a bad knee. I don't need—" "Then Vasquez will confirm that and we'll move on." Maya's voice was patient but absolute, the voice of someone who had developed the patience specifically because she'd learned that pushing back took more energy than just staying steady. "Jack wants you seen. You let someone look at you and then we figure out next steps. It's not complicated." "What are the next steps?" "One thing at a time." Emily went back to watching the window. The town moved past gas stations, a tire shop, the library she spent 2 hours in every day, a school with a blacktop where kids were already running in the cold morning light. Prescott Valley was not a bad town exactly. It was an ordinary town with ordinary complications and a Bradford family-shaped blind spot that had calcified over years into something that looked from the outside like community and felt from the inside like a thumb on the scale. "Tell me about the Bradfords," she said. Maya was quiet for a beat. "What do you know already?" "What Jack told me, Garrett Bradford City Council Real Estate. The name works like a force field." She paused. "Tyler is the son who was in the parking lot. Who were the others?" "Jack's still working on that. He had descriptions, not name. He said 4. I saw 4. Tyler was the one giving orders or trying to. The tall one was the one who—" She stopped. "He was the physical one. The other 2 were just there. Audience guañemos." Maya nodded. Her jaw had tightened in a way she was controlling carefully. "That tracks with Tyler Bradford's history. He doesn't usually get his hands dirty himself. He likes to have people around him who will." "You know him." "I know of him. There's been incidents. Before you." "Nothing that stuck." She signaled turned. "The Bradford name has a way of making incidents stop sticking." "How?" "Money. And the specific way money moves in a town this size. Garrett Bradford has been on the city council long enough that the council is basically his. He has the police chief's number on speed dial. He has relationships with the county prosecutor's office. When Tyler does something, there's a phone call, and then there's a settlement, or there's pressure on whoever was going to testify, or there's a paperwork error, or it just goes away." She said it flatly, not with the anger of someone discovering injustice, but with the exhaustion of someone who has known about it for a long time. "He's been doing it for years. Tyler knows it. That's why he does what he does. He has proof of concept." Emily sat with this. "Last night he said, when I got up, he said, 'You have any idea who my father is?' Like that was supposed to stop everything. For most people in this town, it does." "I'm not from this town," Emily said. "Not really. I mean, I'm here, but I didn't grow up here. I don't owe anyone anything. I don't have anything for them to threaten." She paused. "That might be the first time that's actually been useful." Maya looked at her sideways. Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile, but the thing that precedes a smile when the person isn't ready to commit to it yet. "That's a hell of a way to look at it. I'm good at reframing." "Yeah," Maya said quietly. "I can see that." Dr. Vasquez was a small, precise woman in her 50s who examined Emily with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who genuinely wanted to know what was wrong rather than someone who wanted to find enough to justify a bill. She pressed along Emily's ribs with practiced fingers, asked her to rate the pain, watched her face rather than waiting for the number because she understood that people who had learned to minimize their pain for survival's sake underreported on scales. 3 bruised, 1 cracked, she said, which matched Emily's own assessment exactly and made Emily feel absurdly a small flash of pride. "Nothing displaced. Your body's going to hurt for 3 to 4 weeks, and I need you to not do anything that involves impact or heavy lifting during that time." "Okay. I mean it. A cracked rib heals clean if you let it. It gets complicated if you don't." "I understand." Vasquez looked at her over the top of her glasses. "Do you have somewhere stable to be for the next few weeks? Somewhere you can rest?" Emily opened her mouth. "She does," Maya said from the doorway. Emily closed her mouth. She looked at Maya. Maya looked at the wall with the expression of someone who has made a statement and stands behind it and is not going to elaborate yet. Vasquez gave Emily a sheet of paper with instructions and a sample pack of anti-inflammatories and a number to call if anything changed. She squeezed Emily's hand once at the door briefly with both of hers. Not a medical gesture, just a human one, and said, "You take care of yourself." It landed differently than it usually did when people said that. In the truck, Emily said, "What did you mean she does?" "I meant what I said." "Maya." "There's a room." Maya started the engine. "Above the garage at a property we own on Iron Springs Road. It's basic bed bathroom, small kitchen. It's empty right now. Jack and I talked this morning, and it's yours for as long as you need it." The silence in the truck was full and complicated. "I told you, don't take charity, I know." Maya put the truck in reverse, checked her mirror. "You've said it 3 times. I've heard it all 3 times. And I'm going to tell you the same thing I told you in the alley. This is not charity. This is consequence. You stepped into something last night that had consequences, and one of them is that you don't sleep behind a dumpster anymore. You can call it whatever you need to call it. Call it a temporary logistical arrangement. Call it a roof with paperwork pending. Call it whatever makes it possible for you to say yes." She pulled out of the parking lot. "But say yes." Emily looked at her hands in her lap. "Yes," she said. She didn't realize how much she'd needed to say it until she heard herself say it. Something in her chest, not the cracked rib. Something older than the cracked rib, something that had been held rigid for 14 months, went slightly less rigid. Not all the way, not even close to all the way, but 1 degree. 1 degree was enough for now. By noon, the word had reached Phoenix, not a rumor. Not the kind of half-shaped information that traveled through gossip and morphed into something unrecognizable by the third telling. A name, a location, a specific event. Iron Jack Donahue Prescott. Valley, 4 men, 1 girl, a parking lot. The specificity was the thing that moved it fast. You couldn't dismiss it because it was too concrete, and you couldn't water it down because every version was the same version. Cole Garrett heard it from his chapter president at 7:45 a.m. By 8:30, he'd passed it to 6 others. By 10, those 6 had passed it to their own networks. It moved the way important things move through communities that have survived by staying connected, fast, clean, without distortion. What attached itself to the information, what traveled with it like a charge, was the detail about the girl. Homeless, 19, no one. Stepped in anyway. That detail did something to every person who heard it. Not the same thing to each person. The thing it did was specific to whoever was receiving it, but it did something. For some, it was the 19 years old. For others, it was the no one. For a man named Decker riding captain out of Tucson, it was the stepped in any way which hit him in a place he recognized because he'd had a moment once years ago when he'd stepped in anyway himself. And it had cost him, and he'd never regretted it, not for a single day. And the idea of a 19-year-old girl with nothing to her name doing the same thing and then lying broken in a parking lot while the people who'd done it walked away easy, it put something in his throat that was not going away. He called Ruiz at 11. "What do we need him?" he said, skipping hello. Ruiz said, "Not yet. Jack wants it to breathe for now. We need to know more about the Bradfords before anyone moves. I know people in Prescott Valley." "So does Jack. He's working it." "Decker." Ruiz's voice was measured. "I hear you. I feel it too. But if we move wrong on this, if we give them anything to call us the problem instead of them..." He paused. "Jack knows what he's doing. Give it until tonight." Decker gave it until tonight. But he went to his garage and he made some calls of his own, not to move, just to prepare, just to have the shape of the thing ready when the call came, and he was not the only one. Tyler Bradford woke up at 10:30 a.m. in a house that cost $2 million and made excellent coffee from a machine that cost $4,000. He sat in his kitchen in track pants and a t-shirt and drank the coffee and checked his phone and felt as he generally felt in the mornings after an evening of that kind of excitement, a certain satisfied flatness. Not guilt. He had never experienced guilt in any form he recognized as such. What he felt instead was a kind of morning after clarity, the same clarity he'd feel after a good game or a hard run, the sense of energy expended if something settled. He scrolled through his messages, texts from the guys from last night. Ryan confirming the story they'd agreed on. If anyone asked which was that, they'd left the bar, walked to their cars, seen nobody, done nothing. Marcus being characteristically oblique about the whole thing. Devin, the one whose watch had caught the light, whose father Tyler relied on for certain business arrangements, had sent a single thumbs-up emoji at 1 a.m., which Tyler read as, "You're good," which was how Devin communicated reassurance. He was about to put the phone down when he saw the missed call. His father's personal cell, missed at 9:17 a.m. Tyler's stomach did a small thing he did not acknowledge as concern. He called back. Garrett Bradford answered on the first ring. "Come to the office." No greeting. "Now." "Dad, I have a..." "Now, Tyler." He drove to his father's office in downtown Prescott Valley in 17 minutes. The office was on the third floor of a building Garrett Bradford owned naturally, and it had the particular aesthetic of a room designed by someone who wanted to communicate power without having to say the word. Dark wood clean lines, a view of the street below that positioned the person behind the desk as slightly higher than everything else. Garrett Bradford was 63 and had the build of a man who had once been athletic and had stayed disciplined enough in middle age that people still noticed the architecture underneath. He was at his desk when Tyler came in, and he did not look up immediately, which was a technique Tyler had watched him use his entire life. The deliberate delay that communicated the hierarchy of the room before a word was spoken. When he finally looked up, his expression was one Tyler did not see often. Not anger exactly, something colder. "Sit down," he said. Tyler sat. "Tell me about last night." "There's nothing to tell. We left the bar, Don't." Garrett's voice didn't rise. It never rose. "I'm not asking you for the version you've rehearsed. I'm asking you what happened. You have 30 seconds to decide whether you're going to tell me the truth or lie to me, and I strongly recommend the former because I already know more than you think I do." Tyler's jaw tightened. "We ran into an old biker in the parking lot. There was a disagreement. A disagreement. Things got physical. It was, the biker is Jack Donahue." Garrett said the name with the flatness of someone picking up an object to examine its weight. "He's been a member of the Hells Angels for 37 years. He is well regarded, which is an understatement. And there was a girl." Tyler said nothing. "A homeless girl," Garrett continued, "who apparently intervened on his behalf, who you and your friends then beat and robbed." He paused. "Is that a fair summary?" She wasn't seriously hurt. She got in the middle of something that was none of her. Tyler. The word came down like a door closing. "Do you understand what you've done? It's handled. Ryan has the story Devin's. It is not handled." For the first time, something moved in Garrett Bradford's face, a tightening around the eyes, something that was not quite fear, but was adjacent to it. "I got a call this morning from a man I know in the county prosecutor's office. The girl was seen at a clinic this morning. She was brought there by a woman named Maya Reyes who rides with the Hells Angels out of the Prescott Valley chapter." Tyler went still. "And I got a call from someone else who monitors certain communications. I won't go into detail about who tells me that Jack Donahue's name has been moving through the Hells Angels network since last night, that the story of what happened, including the detail about the girl, including your name, has been circulating since early this morning." Garrett leaned forward slightly. "Do you understand what I'm telling you? This did not stay local. This is not a noise complaint from a neighbor. This is not a fender bender we pay to make go away." Tyler's hands were very still on the armrests of the chair. "So we pay, like always. The girl can be... You cannot pay a Hells Angel to look the other way when someone touched his people." Garrett said it quietly, precisely like someone explaining a law of physics. "That's not how it works. That's not the world you're in. You've spent your life operating in a world where money settles things. This is a different world, different rules." "So what do we do?" The silence that followed was not comfortable. Garrett Bradford stared at his desk for a moment, and in that moment, Tyler saw something he had never seen in his father's face before, the specific look of a man who is calculating and finding that the numbers don't work the way they usually do. "First, you say nothing to anyone. Not Ryan, not Devin, not anyone." Garrett looked up. "I'll make some calls. I have relationships that may be useful here. But Tyler..." His voice shifted into something that would have been mistaken by anyone who didn't know him well for fatherly concern. "You need to be very clear about something. If this girl presses charges and the Angels are backing her, a settlement is going to look like guilt. And my ability to manage that depends entirely on nothing else surfacing. Nothing. Do you understand me? Are there other incidents I need to know about?" Tyler looked at his father. The careful practiced blankness on his face did not fully cover what was underneath. No, he said. Garrett Bradford studied his son for a long moment. Don't lie to me, he said quietly. There's nothing else. It was not true. They both knew it was not true. But Garrett Bradford had made a long career of allowing himself to believe the useful version of events, and so he nodded and picked up his phone, and Tyler left the office and the machine that had always protected him began its work. The machine called the police chief at 11:45. It reached the county prosecutor's office by 12:30. It put out feelers to 3 city council members by 2 p.m. It was a well-oiled machine. It had never failed. But this time, the machine did not know what was already moving toward it. Emily was sitting on the edge of the bed in the room above the garage on Iron Springs Road when Maya's phone rang at 1 p.m. and Maya stepped outside to take it. The room was exactly what Maya had said: basic, clean a bed and a bathroom, and a small kitchen with a 2-burner stove. There was a window that looked east toward the Bradshaw Mountains, which were snow-capped and sharp-edged against the sky. Emily had not seen a mountain through a window in 14 months. She had seen plenty of sky, more sky than most people see, in a lifetime when you sleep outside, but it was different to see the mountain through the frame of a window. It suggested that the window belonged to you. It suggested that this was your view. She was not ready to go that far yet, but she sat and looked at it. Her ribs hurt. The anti-inflammatories Vasquez had given her were taking the edge off but not removing it. The crack was going to make itself known every time she breathed too deeply for the next 4 weeks, reminding her of the parking lot, reminding her of the parking lot, reminding her. She had decided she could live with that. She had lived with worse reminders. She was thinking about the photograph. Photo booth pictures sometimes survive in the chain's database, Maya had said. She didn't know which chain. She didn't know if there was a database or if accessing it was even possible, or if the specific booth where she and her mother had stood in 2013 at a truck stop outside Kingman still existed at all. But she was thinking about it. She was thinking about her mother's face in that photograph, the real laugh, the one that came from somewhere below the performance, the one that appeared most often in the good stretches when Diane Parker was fully present in her body and her eyes were clear, and she and Emily were just 2 people in a photo booth making ridiculous faces at a camera. She was thinking about whether her mother knew. Whether somewhere in the fog of wherever Diane Parker currently was, Emily had not had an address for her in 8 months, the last known location being a treatment program in Tucson that had since lost track of her, whether she knew that her daughter was in Prescott Valley with a cracked rib and $31.40 less than she'd had yesterday, in a room with a mountain view that she was not sure how to inhabit. Maya came back in. Her face was arranged carefully the way faces get when they're arranging themselves around information. What? Emily said. That was Ruiz, Jack's road captain. Maya sat down in the single chair across from the bed. There's something you need to know. Tell me. The Bradford family is moving. Garrett Bradford made calls this morning to the police chief and the county prosecutor. We don't know the exact content, but the direction is clear. They're trying to get ahead of any potential criminal complaint, which means they're trying to make sure that if you go to the police, the reception you get has already been shaped. Emily sat with this for 4 seconds. So if I try to press charges, it'll be complicated. It doesn't mean you can't. It means it won't be straightforward, and it means you need to know what you're walking into. Maya's eyes were steady. Jack is talking to a lawyer, a good one from Flagstaff, someone outside Bradford's sphere. She's willing to take your case. On what basis? I have no money. She's doing it because Jack asked her to, and because, Maya paused, because the story is getting bigger than Tyler Bradford's father can quietly contain. It's not just us knowing anymore, Emily. It moved overnight. There are people in Phoenix, Tucson, Flagstaff who know what happened to you. They know your name. They know what you did. Emily stared at her. What do you mean they know my name? Jack told them. Not to expose you, he asked everyone he told to keep it within the network for now. But within the network, you are known. What you did in that parking lot is known. Maya leaned forward slightly. Emily, you need to understand something. These are not people who forget, and they are not people who leave debts unpaid. The words went into Emily's chest, somewhere near the cracked rib, and found a different kind of ache. I didn't do it to be owed anything, she said. I know that. That's exactly why it matters. At 3 p.m., Iron Jack drove to the clinic on Miller Valley Road, not because he had an appointment, but because Dr. Vasquez was a woman whose opinion he trusted and he wanted to tell her something in person. The girl, he said from the doorway of her office. Emily Parker. Vasquez looked up from her desk. She was here this morning. I know, Maya brought her. He sat down without being invited, which was a habit Vasquez had stopped objecting to years ago. How bad? 1 cracked rib, 3 bruised, knee contusion, superficial facial trauma. She folded her hands on her desk. She's been living rough for a while, Jack. She's underweight. She's been managing stress fractures in that left knee that she didn't mention, and probably doesn't know the name for it, just knows it hurts sometimes. She needs consistent food and rest, and she needs someone to make sure she stays somewhere safe long enough to let her body catch up with what it's been through. She's on Iron Springs Road. Good. Vasquez looked at him carefully. How are your ribs? Fine. You were at the ER last night. Briefly. Jack. They're cracked. I've had cracked ribs. I know what to do with them. He met her gaze. I want to ask you something. If Emily decides to press charges, when she decides to press charges, she's going to need medical documentation. Photographs, clinical, notes, the whole record of what was done to her. I want that file complete and airtight. It already is. Vasquez said it simply. I documented everything. I always document everything. Even with the Bradford name in the picture. She looked at him steadily. Especially then. He nodded. Thank you. Jack. She stopped him at the door. How many are coming? He'd been waiting for someone to ask him directly. He looked at her, this woman who had been patching up his chapter for 15 years, who'd never asked him for anything, who'd always treated the people he brought to her with the same precise, unapologetic care she gave everyone, and he decided she deserved the honest answer. Enough, he said. She nodded. She looked back down at her desk. He left. At 4:30 p.m., Tyler Bradford met Ryan Calloway at a bar on the east side of town, away from the places they usually went, and they sat in a corner booth, and Ryan ordered bourbon, and Tyler ordered water because Tyler's stomach was doing something it didn't usually do. Your dad handle it, Ryan said. He's handling it. So we're good. He made calls. Tyler turned his glass in his hands. He seemed, I don't know, different. Different how? Tyler did not have precise language for what he'd seen in his father's face that morning, the moment of calculation that didn't resolve cleanly the thing in the eyes that he had never seen there before. He'd built his entire life on the certainty that his father's machine was invincible. He'd never needed to question it because it had never given him reason to. But this morning there had been a second, just a second, when Garrett Bradford had looked at his son, and the certainty had not been there in the usual way, and Tyler had felt something he did not have a word for because he had never needed to feel it before. He said the biker Jack Donahue, he said the guy's been with the Hells Angels for 37 years. Ryan shrugged. So it's not just some guy, Ryan, it's, Tyler stopped. He picked up his water. He said the story's been moving through their network, that people know. People always hear about things. Not like this. Tyler looked at the table. He said my name is out there, that the girl's name is out there. That it's, he stopped again. Ryan looked at him with the particular blankness of someone who had not yet been required to understand that there were situations money and a famous father didn't fix. Tyler, it's handled. Your dad's handled worse. Has he? Tyler said. Ryan didn't answer. They drank in silence. Outside the bar, a truck Tyler didn't recognize drove past slowly. Then another. Then a third. He wasn't watching the window, so he didn't see them. But he would have noticed if he'd been watching that all 3 trucks had the same sticker on the rear bumper, simple red and white. He wasn't watching. He was staring at his water. But they were there. Ahem. At 6 p.m., Ruiz called Iron Jack. Flagstaff chapter is in, he said. Kingman is in. Tucson had confirmed 20 minutes ago. Phoenix has been in since this morning. Cole Garrett personally called me to make sure we know he's coordinating from that end. A pause. Jack, the number is moving past what I expected. How far past? I thought we'd have 50, maybe 80 by tomorrow. Ruiz's voice was level, but underneath it was something that sounded like a man looking at a thing he hadn't quite anticipated. It's looking more like several hundred. They're asking about timing. Iron Jack was sitting on his back porch in the cold coffee in his hands, looking at the mountains. He thought about Emily Parker saying, I couldn't not. He thought about the parking lot and the light catching an expensive watch and the sound of laughter in the dark. He thought about Garrett Bradford making calls to the police chief this morning, the machine engaging, doing what it always did. Tell them tomorrow morning, he said, dawn, Prescott Valley. You sure about the timing? They beat a girl with nothing and left her in a parking lot because they were sure nobody would care. His voice was very quiet. I want them to wake up and find out what caring looks like. Ruiz was quiet for a moment. Understood. And Ruiz, tell everyone no confrontation, no provocation. We're not there to fight. We're there to be seen. They'll understand. Make sure. Iron Jack paused. How's she doing, Emily? Maya says she's settled in, eating, resting, doesn't know how to accept help and is doing it anyway. A beat. Maya likes her. Maya doesn't like anyone. I know, that's what I'm saying. Iron Jack ended the call and sat in the cold and looked at the mountains and felt the particular weight of something that had been set in motion and was now moving entirely under its own power. Across town in the room above the garage on Iron Springs Road, Emily Parker sat on the edge of her bed with the anti-inflammatories and a glass of water Maya had left and thought about everything she'd been told and everything she hadn't. She thought about the file Dr. Vasquez had built. She thought about the lawyer in Flagstaff. She thought about the card in her pocket, the one with the phone number in blue ink, which she'd kept, even though she now had Maya's number, because the card was from Jack. And the card was the first time someone had handed her something and called it a debt instead of a favor. She lay back, carefully avoiding the rib, and looked at the ceiling. At some point she slept. She did not know sleeping that on every major highway that fed into Prescott Valley, from the south and east and west, headlights were beginning to accumulate in the dark. Not a crowd yet, not even close to a crowd yet, just the first threads of something enormous in the process of gathering itself. She did not know that in Phoenix and Tucson and Flagstaff and Kingman engines were being checked and gas tanks filled and the morning departure time was being set into phones and communicated through networks. She did not know any of that. She knew for the first time in 14 months that when she woke up in the morning, the ceiling would be the same ceiling she'd fallen asleep under, that the mountain would still be through the window, that someone would probably bring her coffee. She held on to that, held it the way she'd held on to numbers as something solid in a life that had been entirely liquid. In the dark outside, the first engines were already turning over. She woke at 5:47 a.m. to a sound she could not immediately name. Not an alarm, not the dumpster lid banging in the alleyway, which was the sound she'd woken to most mornings for 14 months. Something else, low, distant, rhythmic, the kind of sound that bypassed the thinking brain and went straight to the body, vibrating in the sternum before the ears fully processed it. Emily lay still for 3 seconds, taking inventory the way she always did, ceiling window mountain pale pre-dawn gray. Right, Iron Springs Road, the room above the garage, real. She sat up carefully, favoring the left side, and moved to the window. The road below was empty. The neighborhood was quiet, but the sound was coming from further out from the highway, she thought, or from multiple highways, and it was not a single engine, but many layered on top of each other in a way that built rather than faded, that grew as she stood there listening until it was something you didn't just hear, but felt in the soles of your feet through the floor. Her phone, the prepaid Maya had pressed into her hands the night before, already loaded with $20, showed 5:49 a.m. and one text from Maya sent at 5:30. It said, "They're coming. Stay inside for now. I'll be there at 7. Emily read it twice. She stood at the window in the gray pre-dawn and listened to the sound grow. Ruiz got the first count at 5:15 a.m., standing at the edge of the highway interchange south of Prescott Valley, with his coffee going cold in his hand. He had a radio and a phone and a clipboard, which was a habit he'd developed years ago, because some things needed to be written down, needed to be made solid on paper so you could hold them when everything else was moving fast. The first group came from Phoenix, 43 riders, organized into formation. The way long-distance rides are organized, the road captain up front, everyone staggered back in the pattern that used the road efficiently and kept the group visible and cohesive. They came in clean, no noise beyond what the engines made, and Ruiz watched them pass and counted and wrote down 43 and felt something move in his chest. Then the Tucson group. Then the Flagstaff riders who had driven through mountain cold to get here by dawn. Then a group from Kingman that was larger than anyone had communicated 28, not the 15 he'd been told. Because when people called their people and their people called their people, the number had grown past the original estimate. Then a cluster of independents from Yavapai County riders who weren't chapter members, but who had heard and who had come anyway, because sometimes the thing that's happening is larger than the organizations that contain it, and the only reasonable response is to show up. By 6:30 a.m. Ruiz had counted 271. He called Iron Jack. 271, he said. How's the formation? Clean, quiet, nobody's looking for trouble. He looked out at the gathering mass of riders settling into the staging area they designated on the edge of town, an empty commercial lot that Jack had arranged access to through a contact large enough for this just barely. Jack, there are more coming. I can see headlights on 69 still moving. How many more? I don't know yet. A lot. Iron Jack was quiet for a moment. Keep counting. Shota. Garrett Bradford found out at 6 a.m. from the police chief. He was still in bed when his phone rang, the personal cell, the one with the number that only 12 people in Prescott Valley had, and he answered it the way he always answered unexpected early calls. Alert. Immediately voice controlled the decades of training. That meant he never sounded surprised even when he was. We have a situation, Chief Dennis Holt said. He was a man who had worked for Garrett Bradford in the relevant sense of that phrase for 9 years. He was competent and practical and had long since made his accommodation with the way things worked in Prescott Valley. But this morning his voice had a texture it didn't usually have. Tight, careful, the voice of someone managing information they're not sure how to categorize. There are riders gathering on the south edge of town. Hell's Angels predominantly, but not exclusively. I've got reports of groups coming in from multiple directions. How many? Estimate right now is 200 to 300. It's still early. Garrett Bradford sat up in his dark bedroom and processed this the way he processed all challenges, as a logistics problem with a solution as a situation with leverage points that needed to be identified and applied. What do you need from me? I need to know how you want this handled. We can put units at the interchange. We can... No. His voice was sharp. You do not send units to the interchange. You do not make this a confrontation. Do you understand me? The moment you put police in their path, you give them a story, and the story stops being about my son and starts being about police versus bikers, and every liberal in the country lines up behind them. He was already thinking, already moving through the decision tree. What are they doing? Are they moving? Are they staging? As far as we can tell, there's an empty commercial lot on Glassford Hill Road. They're gathering there. Are they armed? We have no information on that. Legally open carry is... I know what's legal. That wasn't the question. Garrett stood up, moved to the window. I want eyes on that lot. Plain clothes. Not a provocation observation. And I want to know the minute any of them moves toward downtown or toward any residential area. Understood. And Holt, his voice went very flat. No incidents. Whatever you feel like doing this morning, don't. We cannot give them a reason. Are we clear? Clear. He hung up and stood at the window and thought about what he'd said to Tyler the previous morning. This is a different world, different rules. He'd believed he was in control of the game when he said it. He'd believed the call to the prosecutor's office had bought time that the machine could run its course before anything escalated. 200 to 300 riders at dawn. He picked up the phone again. He called his lawyer. Tyler Bradford found out the way most 23-year-olds found out about things from his phone, from someone who'd seen it at 6:45 a.m. when Ryan Calloway sent him a photograph. The photograph was taken from a car window, clearly by someone driving slowly past the staging area on Glassford Hill Road. It showed bikes, many bikes. The image was not high-quality phone camera, early morning light, but it showed enough. Row after row, the riders standing or sitting, the patches visible even at distance, the sheer physical mass of several hundred people who had driven through the night and arrived before sunrise and were now simply there. Ryan's message with the photo said, "You seeing this?" Tyler stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he called his father, and his father didn't answer, which had never happened before. And Tyler sat in his expensive house and felt the walls of the world he'd always lived in do something they had never done before. They felt for the first time like they had a texture, like they could be touched from the other side. Emily was still at the window when Maya arrived at 7:03. She heard the truck, heard Maya's boots on the stairs, heard the knock that was two quick raps already, a pattern, already something Emily's body recognized as safe. "Come in," she said without moving from the window. Maya came in and stood beside her and looked at what Emily was looking at, the street below the neighborhood, the distant sound that had not diminished but grown so that now it was not background, but foreground, not ambient, but present in the way that certain large things become present when they get close enough. "Tell me what's happening," Emily said. Maya was quiet for a moment, then, "By last count, Ruiz has 412 riders in the staging area, more still coming in." She said it simply without performance, but her voice had something in it, a weight, a held quality, like she was being careful with the number, the way you're careful with something fragile. "There are groups we didn't coordinate, people who heard through their own networks and came anyway. Independent riders, people who used to ride with chapters and don't anymore, a group of veterans out of Prescott who aren't affiliated with anyone but who heard the story and drove down at 3 in the morning. Emily turned from the window. "Why?" The word came out small, which surprised her. She'd meant it to come out neutral. "I'm nobody. I'm these people don't know me. They know what you did. I got beat up in a parking lot. Before that," Maya looked at her steadily, "you stepped in front of 4 men for someone you'd never met. You got up when they knocked you down. You stood there with blood on your face and told one of them he'd have to do better than that." Her voice didn't waver. "Emily, in a world where most people cross the street to avoid problems, you walked toward one. And you did it with nothing, no backup, no name, nothing to protect you. You did it because you couldn't not." She paused. "That's not a small thing. To people who have built their lives around loyalty and protection and the idea that some things are worth the cost, that is not a small thing." Emily looked at her hands. Her hands, which had reached for Iron Jack's arm in the parking lot, not because she'd calculated the risk and found it acceptable, but because her hands had simply moved. "I keep telling people I didn't do it to be—" "I know." Maya sat down on the edge of the bed. "That's exactly why it matters. You didn't do it for anything. You did it because it was the right thing and your body knew it before your brain could object." She paused. "Jack says that's the rarest kind of courage. The kind that doesn't know it's courage." Emily sat down on the other side of the bed. She breathed carefully around the cracked rib and looked at the floor and held the number in her head, 412, and tried to make it real and couldn't, not fully, not yet. "What happens now?" she said. "They're going to ride through town," Maya said. "Not to anyone's house, not to the police station, not to Bradford's office, just through town. Main Street, the routes people use every day. They're going to be seen." She paused. "And then they're going to park outside this hospital. You're going in today for a formal examination. The lawyer from Flagstaff, her name is Sarah Chen. She's meeting us there at 9. She needs you examined and documented at the hospital level, not just the clinic for the criminal complaint." "The criminal complaint," Emily repeated. "If you want to file one, it's your choice." Jack was clear about that. Everything that's happening today, the riders, the presence, all of it, it's not to pressure you into anything. It's to make sure that if you do choose to fight this, you're not fighting it alone. Emily thought about Tyler Bradford in the bar parking lot saying, "You have any idea who my father is?" She thought about the photograph gone from her backpack. She thought about the 14 months of being invisible and the years before that of being visible in all the wrong ways to all the wrong systems. She thought about Dr. Vasquez documenting everything with the flatness of someone who does the right thing as a matter of professional routine, about Maya showing up in the alley with 2 coffees and not flinching at what she found. She thought about a number, 412. "I want to file," she said. Maya nodded once slow, the way Jack nodded. Emily was beginning to understand that this was a language that certain people communicated the largest things with the smallest gestures, that the nod meant, "I hear you and I'm with you," and it's done all at once. "Then let's get you ready," Maya said. The ride began at 8 a.m. Ruiz had the final count at 7:55 of standing at the front of the formation in the staging lot, reading it off his clipboard into the radio. 487. Almost 500. More than anyone had projected when Iron Jack had made his 4 phone calls in the ER parking lot 2 nights ago. More than the network had officially coordinated. The last 100 or so had come entirely of their own volition, following the current of the story the way water follows the shape of the land, because some things don't need organizing once they've gathered enough weight. Iron Jack was at the front. He was not supposed to be. Ruiz had suggested twice that someone else should ride point given his ribs, and Iron Jack had received both suggestions, the same way he'd received the emergency room doctor's advice about rest. He rode with his jaw set and his eyes forward and his fractured ribs making themselves known with every vibration of the engine, which he declined to acknowledge. They moved out of the staging area and onto Glassford Hill Road in a column that was by any reasonable measure one of the more remarkable things Prescott Valley had ever seen. Not fast, this was not a race, not a charge, not an aggression. They moved at exactly the speed limit, which was its own kind of statement. We are here, we are legal, we are not giving you a single thing to use against us. The column stretched back so far that the riders at the rear could not see the front, and the sound of it, the layered harmonic of nearly 500 engines at moderate throttle, was the sound Emily had woken to before dawn and tried to name. It had a name now, the town was learning it. People heard before they saw. A woman named Carol Simmons, 64, who had lived on Glassford Hill Road for 30 years, was in her kitchen making oatmeal when the sound moved through her walls, and she went to her front window and stood there with the spoon still in her hand. She had heard motorcycles before everyone in Arizona had heard motorcycles, but not like this, not this many at once, not moving with this kind of deliberate gravity. She called her neighbor. Her neighbor was already at her own window. A man named Pete Darrow, who ran a hardware store on Main Street and had known Garrett Bradford for 20 years and had the particular complicated relationship with him that most small business owners in Prescott Valley had grateful for. The development money uneasy about the cost. Careful never to say anything too directly, was unlocking his store at 8:15 when the column turned onto Main Street and he stopped with his key in the lock and watched. He was watching them when he realized his phone was buzzing in his pocket. He looked at the screen. It was Garrett Bradford's office number. He put the phone back in his pocket and watched the riders pass. A local news crew, which had been tipped off by a source Ruiz had not identified and had not discouraged, was set up at the corner of Main and Gurley by 8:20, the camera rolling. The reporter, a young woman named Kelly Park, who was 3 years out of journalism school and had spent most of those 3 years covering city council meetings and school board disputes, stood in front of the column with her mouth slightly open for a moment before she remembered she was on camera and pulled herself together and started talking. What she said in that first live hit was mostly accurate. Hundreds of riders, Hells Angels insignia, predominant, peaceful, and orderly, moving through downtown Prescott Valley. She did not yet have the full story. She had a partial story, something about an incident involving a local man and a young woman, something about the Bradford family, and she was working her phone in between segments trying to build it out. By 9 a.m., the clip was on social media. By 9:30, it had been shared enough times to show up in the feeds of people who had no connection to Prescott Valley, Arizona, who lived in other states, other regions, who did not know anyone involved, but who watched it and felt something, the specific feeling of witnessing something true in a world that frequently offers the opposite. Sarah Chen arrived at Yavapai Regional Medical Center at 5 minutes to 9, which told Emily something about her before a word was spoken. She was 40 small, with the kind of contained energy that people develop when they've spent years doing work that requires them to be more precise than their opponents and more patient than their clients. She shook Emily's hand with both of hers, not the doctor's gesture Vasquez had made, but something more professional, more deliberate, more like a contract being proposed. Emily, she said, I've read Dr. Vasquez's notes. I've read the police report from the night of the incident, what there is of it, which is not much, which is itself useful information. I want to hear from you directly in your own words what happened, not for the official statement, yet that comes later after the examination. Just for me, so I understand. They sat in a hospital consultation room, Maya outside the door, Maya who had driven her here in the truck, Maya who had said almost nothing on the way and had communicated everything that needed to be communicated through the fact of being present and driving. And Emily told Sarah Chen what happened. All of it. She told it the way she'd told it to Iron Jack, the way she'd told it to Maya directly, without embellishment, without minimizing. She was 19 and she had been through enough to know that embellishment introduced doubt and minimizing introduced doubt, and the truth stated plainly was the most durable thing available to her. Sarah listened without interrupting. She took notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting that was small and very precise. When Emily finished, she looked up. "Who told you to step in?" she said. Emily blinked. "Nobody. No one suggested it, encouraged it, told you that you should." "No, I didn't know any of these people. I'd never met Iron. I'd never met Jack Donahue. I just—" She stopped. "I saw what was happening and I moved." Sarah nodded and wrote something down. "Good. That matters legally. Your intervention was independent and spontaneous. It establishes you as a witness as well as a victim." She set the pen down. "Emily, I need to tell you something about what's likely coming, and I need you to hear it without flinching because it's going to be difficult." "Tell me." "The Bradford family is going to try to make this about you, about your circumstances, your housing situation, your history with foster care, any interaction you've had with law enforcement, anything that can be used to introduce doubt about your credibility." She said it without softness, not because she was unkind, but because she understood that Emily needed clarity more than cushioning. They have resources and they have relationships, and they will use both. The prosecutor's office has already been contacted by Garrett Bradford's people. That doesn't mean the prosecutor is compromised. It means there's pressure. There's a difference. "I know there's a difference," Emily said. Sarah looked at her carefully. "Yes," she said, "I think you do." She picked up her pen again. "What I have on my side is this: Dr. Vasquez's documentation is meticulous. The hospital examination today will add to it. I have your account, which is consistent and credible. I have Iron Jack's account, which is consistent and credible, and comes from a witness with no prior criminal record and 40 years of community ties." She paused. "And I have the fact that 487 people drove to this town before sunrise this morning, which does not constitute legal evidence of anything but does constitute a very clear signal about the community's assessment of what happened to you." Emily sat with this for a moment. "You saw the count?" Ruiz texted Jack. "Jack texted me." A slight shift in Sarah Chen's expression, not quite a smile, but the thing preceding one. "It's now 493. Someone's still coming in from Wickenburg." Yeah. The hospital parking lot had been in Yavapai Regional Medical Center's history. Many things full during flu season, crowded during holiday emergencies. The site of one memorable altercation in 2019 that the staff still talked about. It had never been this. By 9:30 a.m., the column had reached the medical center and formed up in the parking lot and along the adjacent streets in a configuration that the hospital administrator, a careful man named Gerald Watts, described in his emergency call to the board chair as orderly, peaceful, and completely unprecedented. They weren't blocking access. They weren't making demands. They were parked. They were standing or sitting, some with coffee from a drive-through they'd passed en route, some talking quietly among themselves. They were simply there in the way that large things are simply there, the way mountains are there, the way weather is there, not doing anything specific but impossible to ignore. Chief Holt arrived with 4 patrol cars at 9:45, and to his credit, to the credit of whatever instinct had survived his 9 years of accommodation, with the Bradford way of doing things, he did not bring them in hot. He came in slow, parked on the periphery, got out of his car and walked toward the nearest cluster of riders and said neutrally, "Morning. Any of you the point of contact for this?" A man he didn't recognize, mid-50s, weathered face arms that suggested a life lived outdoors, and physically said, "Ruiz is coordinating. He's over by the entrance." Holt found Ruiz. Ruiz looked at him the way Ruiz looked at most things, steady, unhurried, giving nothing away. "Chief, you want to tell me what's happening here?" "We're visiting a friend who was injured," Ruiz said. Holt looked at the 493 motorcycles in and around his hospital parking lot. "That's a lot of visitors." "She's important to us." Holt studied Ruiz for a long moment. He was thinking about Garrett Bradford's voice on the phone that morning. No incidents, we cannot give them a reason. He was thinking about the clip on social media that his own daughter had texted him at 9 a.m. with a message that said, "Dad, is this happening here?" He was thinking about 9 years of small accommodations that had added up to something large, and about the way certain mornings arrived with a clarity that made all those small additions suddenly visible in a different light. "Are you planning to stay here all day?" he said. "Until our friend's legal business is finished," Ruiz said. Then we'll leave. Peaceful. We're always peaceful, Chief. When we're allowed to be. The silence between them had layers. Holt heard them. He nodded once slowly and went back to his car, and he did not call Garrett Bradford back. What? The call Garrett Bradford had been waiting for came at 10:15, not from Holt, but from his lawyer, whose name was Philip Greaves and who had been practicing law in Yavapai County for 30 years, and who had managed in those 30 years to project a consistent and genuine affection for Garrett Bradford, while privately maintaining the specific detachment that skilled lawyers develop toward their most demanding clients. Phil. Garrett was in his office. Tyler was in the chair across from him, summoned at 8 a.m., sitting with the locked stillness of someone who has been told to stay quiet and is struggling with it. Tell me something useful. The criminal complaint has been filed, Greaves said. Emily Parker, through counsel, Sarah Chen out of Flagstaff, which is a problem she's good, has filed with the county sheriff's office rather than Prescott Valley PD, which is a strategic choice that bypasses Chief Holt entirely. The charges are assault and battery robbery, the backpack, and she's requesting investigation of the other 3 individuals present as accessories. A pause. Jack Donahue has filed a separate complaint for assault. The sheriff's office, Garrett said it flatly. Sheriff Martinez has not been, Greaves chose his words carefully. Your relationship with Martinez has been less active than your relationship with Holt. I would not assume the same accommodations. What else? The hospital documentation from this morning, combined with the clinic notes from yesterday, gives Chen a strong foundation for the medical component. And there's a security camera I wasn't aware of on the eastern corner of Rosario's. It appears to cover part of the parking lot. The quality of the silence in Garrett Bradford's office changed. Tyler across the desk went very still. How much of the parking lot? Garrett said. We don't know yet. The camera belongs to the bar, not to the city. Chen's filing a subpoena for the footage this morning. We can contest the subpoena, but contesting it looks like obstruction. It looks like something, yes. Garrett Bradford sat back in his chair and looked at his son. Tyler was looking at the desk. The expensive watch was on his wrist. He'd worn it this morning out of habit, out of the reflex of someone who had always dressed to signal position, and it caught the office light the way it always did. Tyler, Garrett said, the camera at Rosario's. What did it see? Tyler's jaw tightened. His eyes stayed on the desk. I don't know, he said. Tyler. I said I don't know. He looked up then, and in his face was something Garrett Bradford had never seen there before: fear. Not the social discomfort of someone in trouble that could be bought away, not the anxious entitlement of someone who'd been mildly inconvenienced. Real fear. The fear of someone who has always lived inside walls that were invisible because they never needed to be visible, who was only now realizing in the moment the walls stopped working that they were there at all. Garrett looked at his son for a long moment. He looked at the watch. He thought about what that watch had caught the light of, and in what parking lot, and what it might have been doing when certain things happen. Get out, he said quietly. Dad, go home. Don't speak to anyone. Don't call Ryan. Don't call Devin. Don't call no one. Do you understand me? Tyler stood up. He was 23 years old, and in this moment he looked both younger and older than that, the younger part being the naked fear. The older part being the specific aging that happens to people the moment they understand that the protection they've always counted on has a limit. He left without speaking. The door closed. Garrett Bradford sat alone in his office and picked up his phone and looked at it for a long moment without dialing. Then he set it down and looked at the street below, through his third-floor window. His window, his building, his street, the street he had shaped and managed and navigated for 3 decades, and watched a silver truck drive past, and in the bed of the silver truck was a man he didn't recognize who was wearing a Hells Angels vest, and behind that truck was another, and behind that one, 2 motorcycles moving in tandem. They were not going anywhere particular. They were just in the town, just present. He picked up the phone and called Greaves back. What's the most we're looking at, he said. If the camera saw everything, worst case. Greaves was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the careful neutrality of someone delivering information they have taken the human element out of because the human element would be too large to manage. For Tyler individually, felony assault robbery, given the victim's circumstances, a DEA could argue aggravating factors. Given the number of witnesses now available, Jack Donahue, plus potentially corroborating witnesses from the area, and given the medical documentation, the footage, if it's comprehensive. Another pause. The filing isn't the end of this, Garrett. It's the beginning. Can we settle with the girl? Yes. She has Sarah Chen. Chen won't settle for anything that doesn't include criminal accountability. That's her position in every case of this type. She doesn't take settlement money as a substitute for charges. Greaves's voice was precise and entirely without judgment. And given what's outside the hospital right now, given the national attention this has already attracted, I've gotten 3 calls from journalists since 9 this morning. A settlement offer right now reads as an admission of guilt and a PR disaster simultaneously. Garrett Bradford closed his eyes for 1 second only. Then he opened them. Find out about that camera, he said. Find out exactly what it covers. I will, but Garrett, Greaves stopped. Say it. If the camera covers what I think it might cover based on where Tyler and the others were, and the duration of the incident, this is not something I can make go away. I want to be honest with you about that. I can manage it. I can work within it. But the machinery that's worked for us in the past was built for a smaller scale of problem. And this problem, he paused. This problem has 500 witnesses. The line was quiet. 493, Garrett said. Pardon. Someone told me the count. It's 493. He said it without inflection. He was doing the thing he'd always done, reducing everything to numbers because numbers were manageable, because numbers had dimensions you could work with. But this number sat differently than numbers usually sat. This number had weight that didn't diminish when you looked at it directly. Garrett, Greaves said carefully, is there something else I need to know about Tyler? About other incidents? The silence lasted 4 seconds. Garrett Bradford looked at the street below and watched another rider pass unhurried, headed nowhere specific, just in the town. Just seen. Call me when you have the camera information, he said and ended the call. He sat in his office for a long time after that. He did not make any other calls. He sat with the particular experience of a man who has built a world around himself that has always moved the way he needed it to move, and who is sitting in the first morning of understanding that the world has edges. At 11:30, Iron Jack found Emily in the hospital corridor outside the consultation room where Sarah Chen was finishing the documentation. He was moving carefully ribs, but he was moving the same straight-backed, forward motion he'd had in the parking lot, the same statement made without choosing to make it. Emily looked at him. He looked at her. How'd it go? He said. Sarah's good. She's the best I know. She told me about the camera, the one at Rosario's. He nodded. We knew about it. I mentioned it to Ruiz 3 days ago. He checked the angle. Emily stared at him. You knew. I knew there was a camera. I didn't know what it caught, but I knew it was there, and I made sure Chen knew, and I made sure she moved fast on the subpoena before anyone had time to think about making the footage disappear. He said it without drama, as though this were simply good planning, which it was. The Bradford family has been making things disappear for a long time. The difference this time is that we moved faster. She looked at him, this man with the cracked ribs and the gray beard and 37 years of loyalty built into his posture, and felt something she did not entirely have words for. Not gratitude exactly. Gratitude was too small and too simple for the architecture of what had happened in the last 48 hours. Something larger. Something that included gratitude and also included the specific emotion of someone who has been operating alone for so long that the presence of allies feels not just helpful, but structurally different, like a building that has been standing on one wall and suddenly has 4. There are 493 people in that parking lot, she said. 494, he said. Someone came in from Wickenburg about an hour ago. She almost laughed. And then she did laugh, just a small one, careful around the rib, and he watched her laugh with the expression of a man who has been holding something tightly and is allowing himself briefly to set it down. What happens now? She said. The same question she kept asking because the answer kept changing. Now the sheriff's office processes the complaint. Chen follows the subpoena for the footage. The Bradfords figure out that their usual playbook doesn't apply here. He paused. And you eat something. Maya told me you barely touched breakfast. I wasn't hungry. You've got a cracked rib, and you're filing criminal charges against one of the most connected families in Yavapai County. You need to eat. She looked at him for a moment. You're bossier than you look. I'm exactly as bossy as I look. he said, and this time they both did something that was close enough to laughing that it counted. At 12:15, a man named Devin Marsh, whose father had the business arrangement with Garrett Bradford, whose watch had caught the light in the parking lot, who had sent a single thumbs-up emoji at 1 a.m. thinking it meant everything was settled, got a call from his father. His father's voice when Devin answered was not his usual voice. It was quieter, slower, the voice of someone who has received information and is still deciding what to do with the weight of it. "Devin," his father said, "I need you to come home." "What happened?" "There's a camera," his father said, "at the bar. It covers most of the parking lot." Devin sat down on the nearest surface, which was a kitchen counter. His legs had done something they didn't usually do. "How much does it?" "Most of it." His father's voice was very controlled. "Devin, I need you to listen to me. I've spoken to our attorney this morning. Tyler Bradford's family is going to be managing their own legal exposure, and that management is going to involve decisions that may not align with your interests. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Devin understood. The thing Tyler had always communicated, his father handles it. Everyone is fine. The Bradford name is, the force field was communicating something different now. Was communicating clearly and finally that when the walls of the force field cracked, the people inside it found out very quickly where the real boundaries were. "What do I do?" Devin said. His father was quiet for a moment. "Come home," he said again, "and call a lawyer, your own, not the Bradfords." Devin put the phone down and sat on his kitchen counter and thought about a parking lot. He thought about a girl getting up when she'd been knocked down. He thought about what the watch on his wrist had been doing when she got up. He thought about the camera at the corner of Rosario's that he had not known was there covering most of the parking lot. And he thought about the subpoena Sarah Chen had filed that morning. And he thought about 494 riders in a hospital parking lot. And he thought about how the world had always arranged itself around Tyler Bradford's comfort and how it was apparently in the process of doing something else. He took the watch off. He set it on the counter. He called a lawyer. By 2 p.m., the clip from Kelly Park's morning report had accumulated a number of views that her producer described to her over the phone in a tone of professional disbelief as significant. By significant, he meant that it had been picked up by 2 national outlets. By 2 national outlets, he meant that the story of what happened in Prescott Valley, the girl, the parking lot, the 500 riders at dawn, was no longer a local story. Kelly Park was in her car outside the hospital when she got the call. She was working 3 phones and a laptop and had drunk enough coffee to qualify as a medical event, and she was in the specific way of journalists who find themselves at the center of something large that they didn't expect, both thrilled and terrified, and trying not to be either because both got in the way of the work. She had the outline of the story now. She got down it from 3 sources, none of them official, all of them consistent. A homeless girl, a biker, a parking lot, 4 young men with expensive clothes and a famous father in a single act of courage that had set off a chain of consequence, so out of proportion to its origin, one girl stepping forward that it kept making her stop and sit with it. Her editor called at 2:15. "How fast can you file? Give me 2 hours." "You have 90 minutes. She started typing. She typed the way good reporters type when the story is true and the facts are solid, and the only job is to say it clearly, fast, without waste, following the line of what happened, without editorializing, trusting the events to carry their own weight. The events did. At 2:45 from somewhere in the hospital parking lot, a radio picked up an outside signal and someone turned the volume up and a song came through that nobody had chosen deliberately, but that nobody moved to change. And for a few minutes, nearly 500 people who had driven through the night from different places and different circumstances stood in a hospital parking lot in the winter sun of the Arizona desert and were quiet together. And the mountain was there above the town, the way it was always there. And inside the hospital, a 19-year-old girl with a cracked rib and 30 years of fighting still ahead of her sat with a lawyer who was building a case that was going to go places none of them could fully see yet. And the footage from a camera at the corner of Rosario's Bar and Grill was sitting in a server somewhere, waiting for a subpoena to free it. And in an office on the 3rd floor of a building on the main street of Prescott Valley, a man who had arranged the world around himself for 30 years sat alone and did not make any more calls. The mountain was there. The riders were there. The story was moving. Some things, once they start, do not stop. The footage arrived at Sarah Chen's office at 3:47 p.m., sent directly from the Yavapai County Sheriff's Department after Sheriff Martinez signed off on the subpoena with a speed that surprised everyone except Ruiz, who had quietly made a call to someone who knew Martinez personally and had communicated without specific instruction that speed was appropriate here. Sarah was alone in the consultation room when she opened the file. She had a habit before watching evidence for the first time of sitting completely still for 3 seconds, not prayer, not ritual, just a deliberate gathering of herself before she looked at something she couldn't unsee. She had developed this habit in her second year of practice after a case involving footage she had not been prepared for, and she had never abandoned it. She sat still, then she pressed play. The camera at the corner of Rosario's Bar and Grill had a wide angle. It covered the back entrance of the bar, the near half of the parking lot, and because whoever had installed it had tilted it slightly more toward the street than was strictly necessary for security purposes, a substantial portion of the area where the incident had occurred. The timestamp read 9:43 p.m. January 14th. The image quality was not cinematic. It was the flat, color-drained, slightly overexposed footage of a practical security camera that had been installed to deter petty theft and had incidentally recorded something else entirely. She watched it without moving. She watched the whole thing. It ran 4 minutes and 17 seconds from the first visible contact to the moment the four men walked out of frame, easy in their bodies, the way she'd heard described. When it was done, she sat still again for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Iron Jack. "It's comprehensive," she said. He didn't say anything for a second. "How comprehensive?" "It catches all four of them clearly. It catches the initial assault on you. It catches the girl entering frame, her intervention, what happened to her after." She paused. "It catches the watch. It catches the backpack being taken." Another pause. "Jack, it also catches something nobody mentioned to me." "What?" After they walked away, Tyler Bradford came back, just him alone, for approximately 20 seconds. He stood over her while she was on the ground. Sarah's voice was level, precisely, carefully level. He said something. I can't hear it. The audio is ambient street noise, not close enough, but I can see his face. The silence on the line was the kind that has mass. "He came back," Iron Jack said. 20 seconds. Then he left again. She set her phone down on the table and looked at the frozen last frame of the footage, the empty parking lot, the timestamp, the wheel of Jack's motorcycle still visible at the edge of frame. This changes the filing. What started as assault and robbery now includes a component of deliberate intimidation, possibly a hate crime enhancement, given her housing status depending on how Martinez wants to prosecute it. It also establishes premeditation in a way the original complaint implied but couldn't prove. "Send it to Martinez." "I'm sending it now." She was already typing. "Jack, the other three are going to have to make decisions very quickly about whether they want to be standing next to Tyler Bradford when this footage becomes part of the public record. Devin Marsh already called a separate attorney this morning. That attorney called my office 40 minutes ago. Looking for a deal, asking what cooperation might look like." She said it carefully. "I told them I'd discuss it with my client. Emily's the one who decides." "When are you talking to her?" "I'm walking to her room now, Sarah." Emily was sitting up in the hospital bed with the anti-inflammatory in her system and Maya in the chair beside her when Sarah came in. She read Sarah's face, not the surface of it, which was professionally composed, but the thing underneath, the particular tightness that competent people carry when they are managing information that has weight. "Tell me," Emily said. Sarah told her. All of it. The footage, the timestamp, the 4 minutes and 17 seconds, Tyler Bradford coming back alone for 20 seconds and standing over her and saying something she couldn't hear. Emily listened without moving. She had known in the way that people know things, their bodies register before their minds catch up, that something had happened in those gaps in her memory from that night. She hadn't let herself think about it directly. It was the edges of something she'd chosen not to look at, and now it had a shape, a timestamp at a camera angle. "He came back," she said. "Yes." "He wanted to make sure." She said it without question in her voice, just the flat recognition of someone assembling pieces. "He came back to look at me, to make sure I understood." "That's the most likely interpretation, yes." Emily sat with this for a moment. Maya in the chair had not moved. Maya's hands were very still in her lap, Emily was learning how Maya expressed things she was not going to express any other way. Devin Marsh's lawyer contacted you, Emily said. Sarah looked at her carefully. Yes, how did you? You said the other three are going to have to make decisions. You said Devin already called his own lawyer, so his lawyer called you. She looked at Sarah steadily. What does he want? He wants to know if corroboration of your account, would be considered by the prosecutor in determining his level of exposure. Sarah paused. Emily, that decision is Seeker's. I can advise you on the legal implications, but who cooperates and who doesn't? What kind of deal we're willing to support, that's your call. Emily thought about Devin Marsh. She had a clear image of him from the parking lot, the watch of the voice that was smoother than the others, the practiced reasonableness, the thumbs-up emoji at 1 a.m. He had been there. He had not started it, but he had been there, and he had not stopped it, and his watch had caught the light while it was happening. What does cooperation actually get us? She said. If Devin Marsh testifies to what he saw, confirms the sequence of events, identifies the participants, corroborates the footage, it makes the prosecution of Tyler Bradford significantly simpler. It removes the possibility of a conflicting accounts defense. It also creates pressure on the other two, Ryan and Marcus, to decide which side of this they want to be on. Sarah was precise and direct. The footage is strong enough to prosecute without cooperation. With it, it's airtight. So we don't need him. No, but he'd make it faster. Yes. Emily looked at the window. Not the mountain this time. The window faced a different direction from the hospital room, faced a parking lot and a gray afternoon sky. She thought about what faster meant. It meant less time for Garrett Bradford's machine to find angles, less time for the prosecutor's office to feel the weight of Bradford-adjacent pressure, less time for Tyler Bradford to walk around Prescott Valley like a man who expects the world to arrange itself around his comfort. She thought about Tyler coming back for 20 seconds to stand over her while she was on the ground and say something she couldn't hear. Tell Devin Marsh's lawyer that cooperation is welcome, she said. But I want it in writing to Sheriff Martinez's office, not just to you. I want it on the record that he's cooperating voluntarily, and I want full disclosure of everything he knows, not just that night, but before. Any other incidents. She paused. If Tyler Bradford has done this before, I want to know. Sarah wrote something on her legal pad. That's a sound approach. And Sarah, Emily's voice was level, don't settle anything without talking to me first, whatever they offer, whatever number. I never settle without my client's explicit, I know the standard process. I'm telling you my position beyond the standard process. Emily looked at her directly. I don't want money. I want the charges to stick, whatever that costs. Sarah Chen looked at her for a long moment. Then she wrote something on the legal pad and underlined it, and Emily didn't ask what it was because she understood that it was the kind of note a lawyer makes when a client has said something that clarifies the entire shape of the work ahead. Garrett Bradford made 6 calls between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., and none of them went the way his calls usually went. The first was to the county prosecutor, a man named Alan Ferraro, with whom he had maintained what both of them would have called in public in a collegial professional relationship, and what both of them knew in private to be something more specifically instrumental. Ferraro answered, which was a good sign, but his voice had a quality in it that Garrett recognized immediately, the careful, overly neutral tone of a man who has decided something and is choosing not to announce it directly. Alan, Garrett said, I'd like to discuss the situation with the sheriff's complaint. That complaint has been filed with Martinez's office, Garrett. It's not in my jurisdiction until he refers it. We both know that distinction is more administrative than, actually in this case, I think the distinction is exactly what it is. Ferraro's voice remained careful, remained neutral. I'd also want you to know that given the media attention this has attracted, my office is going to be very deliberate about any perception of external input on how we proceed. Alan. Garrett, I have to be honest with you. I have 3 journalists who've contacted my office today. I have a story that's running on 2 national outlets by end of day, and I have footage that I am told is by any reasonable assessment comprehensive. He paused. I think you understand that the landscape here is different from what we've navigated before. So I'm telling you, I can't help you the way you might be hoping. Flat, final, not unkind. I'd strongly recommend Tyler retain the best criminal defense attorney he can find, and I'd recommend moving fast. The call lasted 4 more minutes, mainly because Garrett Bradford was not accustomed to ending calls before he was ready to end them. But when he finally set the phone down, he sat with the residue of it, the specific experience of calling a number you've always been able to count on and finding that the number has changed. He called 3 city council members. The first didn't answer. The second answered was sympathetic, said all the things that sympathetic colleagues say, and made no commitments, which was the same as nothing. The third, a woman named Patricia Okafor, who had been on the council for 6 years and whom Garrett had helped elect in the first of those 6 years, whom he'd considered reliably within his orbit, said something that stopped him cold. Garrett, she said, I've seen the clip online. I've read the initial reports. I want to be honest with you because I think you deserve that. I can't be associated with this publicly, and I can't be seen to be doing anything that looks like it's protecting Tyler from accountability. I have my own re-election in 8 months. She paused. I'm sorry, I genuinely am, but this is where I have to stand. He said something. He didn't remember later what he said. He ended the call. He sat in his office and looked at the street below and did the thing he'd always done, assess the situation as a logistics problem, look for the leverage points. And for the first time in 30 years of doing this, he looked at the leverage points and found that they had moved overnight, had moved as 500 engines gathered in the dark, and a camera at the corner of Rosario's Bar and Grill kept its record, and a 19-year-old girl with nothing to her name filed a complaint with a sheriff who had not been called and softened. He picked up the phone and called his son. Tyler answered on the first ring. He had been waiting for the call the way people wait for things that they know are coming and cannot stop the particular alertness of dread. You need a criminal defense attorney, Garrett said. Not Phil. Phil does civil work. You need someone who handles felony criminal defense, and you need someone from outside this county. The silence on the line was the silence of someone at whose last wall has disclosed its real height. How bad? Tyler said. Garrett Bradford looked at the street below. He thought about 30 years of phone calls that had solved problems, smoothed edges made things go away. He thought about the machine, his machine built carefully over decades, maintained with precision, powered by relationships and reciprocity, and the specific way money moves in small cities when it moves with enough consistency. The footage is comprehensive, he said. Devin Marsh is cooperating with the prosecution. The story is national. He paused. It's bad, Tyler. The sound Tyler made was not quite anything. It was the sound between sounds, the breath of someone standing on the wrong side of a door that is just locked. What do I do, so? You get a lawyer, his father said, and you stop asking me to fix it. He hung up. He sat in the silence of his office and felt with the specificity that only comes to people who have been powerful for a very long time, exactly what it felt like to be on the other side of the word he had used so many times contained. Devin Marsh's statement reached Sheriff Martinez's office at 4:30 p.m. It was 8 pages prepared with his attorney present, signed, and voluntary. It confirmed everything. It confirmed the sequence of events in the parking lot, the names of all 4 participants, the deliberate nature of the assault on Iron Jack, the intervention by Emily Parker, and what had happened to Emily Parker after. It confirmed that Tyler Bradford had initiated both the assault and the decision to target Emily. It confirmed that Tyler had gone back to the parking lot alone while the others waited at Devin's car, which Devin had observed through the rear window. It also contained something that nobody had yet mentioned publicly. Devin Marsh, in response to Sarah Chen's condition about prior incidents, had disclosed 2 previous occasions. One 14 months earlier, one 9 months earlier, in which Tyler Bradford had been involved in assaults on individuals who could not easily defend themselves, both times with Devin and others present, both times settled by Garrett Bradford's office before any formal complaint was filed. Devin had the names of the individuals. Devin had, in the careful way of someone who has been keeping receipts against the day the walls come down, kept texts and photographs from both occasions. He handed all of it over. Martinez read the statement in his office at 4:55 p.m. He read it twice. Then he called Sarah Chen. The prior incidents, he said, you knew about these. My client requested full disclosure of all prior events as a condition of supporting the cooperation agreement. Marsh's attorney provided this documentation this morning. She paused. Sheriff, the individuals named in those prior incidents are locatable. One is still in the county. We'll find them, he said. There's one more thing. Her voice was careful. The second prior incident, the settlement that Garrett Bradford's office arranged 9 months ago, the documentation Devon Marsh provided includes a copy of the settlement agreement. It contains a non-disclosure clause. The individual who settled received $47,000 in exchange for silence. Martinez was quiet for a moment. So Garrett Bradford knew. At minimum, Garrett Bradford knew about an assault 9 months ago that he paid to keep quiet. His knowledge of and response to his son's behavior is potentially relevant to the pattern of conduct argument. She paused again. Sheriff, I'm not a criminal defense attorney, and I'm not telling you how to run your investigation. I'm telling you what I have and giving you the opportunity to determine its relevance. I appreciate that, Martinez said. It was the first time in the conversation that his voice had moved out of neutral. Ms. Chen, Sheriff, tell your client, he stopped, started again. Tell your client this office is going to do its job the right way. The news reached Iron Jack at 5:15 from Ruiz in the staging area, where the majority of riders were still present. Many had ridden away through the afternoon, but several hundred remained, not because anyone had asked them to stay, but because leaving felt wrong, because something was still in process, and the people who'd driven through the night to be here were not the kind of people who left before a thing was finished. Ruiz read the key points from Martinez's office off his phone, Marsh's statement, the prior incidents, the second victim, the settlement agreement. Iron Jack stood and listened. His ribs were making themselves known in the way they'd been making themselves known all day, a constant, specific insistence that he was injured and should rest, and he had been not resting all day, and he was going to not rest for a while longer. Garrett Bradford knew, he said, for at least 9 months, maybe longer, and he paid to keep it quiet. He said it slowly, not with anger. The anger had been present before and had settled into something colder and more durable. So when he said, Tyler, what are you doing in front of me this morning? When he performed the concerned father, he already knew. He'd already paid once. That's how it reads. Iron Jack was quiet for a moment. How's the media? Kelly Park's story went up 40 minutes ago. It's comprehensive. She talked to 3 witnesses. She has the footage count. She has the basics of the prior incidents from sources she's not identifying. It's already running on 2 national sites. Ruiz paused. Jack, there are journalists here now, in the lot, wanting to talk to you. Not yet. Emily. Definitely not yet. She's not ready for cameras. He paused. Sarah Chen can speak. Nobody else. In the Bradford response, they're going to put something out. Let them. Iron Jack looked at the hospital building, at the lit windows of the floor where Emily was at the mountain beyond which was going gray and gold in the late afternoon light. Let them say whatever they say. The footage says what it says. The camera doesn't care who his father is. At 6 p.m., Garrett Bradford's communications team released a statement through the Bradford family attorney. It used the language that such statements always use: deeply concerned, committed to accountability, confident in the legal process, asking for privacy for the family during a difficult time. It said nothing specific. It committed to nothing. It was the statement of a machine still running on its original programming, even after the engine had ceased. Kelly Park read it on her phone and wrote one sentence in response in her story update. The Bradford family did not address the security footage, the cooperation of a co-defendant, or the prior incidents disclosed to the sheriff's office today. That sentence in the context of the story did more work than anything the Bradford statement had said. The statement was shared online primarily by people who were pointing out what it didn't say. This was not the outcome Garrett Bradford's communications team had intended. Tyler Bradford's criminal defense attorney, a man named Howard Blass from Phoenix, who specialized in high-profile criminal defense and charged accordingly, arrived in Prescott Valley at 6:30 p.m. and went directly to Garrett Bradford's office, which was where Tyler also was because Tyler had nowhere else to go, and his father's office was the only geography that had ever felt safe, and it did not feel safe anymore, but it was still the only option. Blass was 60 direct and had the particular manner of someone who had heard everything and been surprised by nothing and still chose every morning to do the work as well as it could be done. He sat across from Tyler and Garrett and looked at the documentation Greaves had assembled and asked precise questions for 40 minutes without judgment, which was a professional skill in which Tyler experienced as the most unsettling thing that had happened to him in 2 days of unsettling things. Because judgment. He knew how to respond to judgment. He'd always been able to deflect, but the absence of it meant he was being assessed purely on the facts, and the facts had stopped being on his side. The footage, Blast said. You went back. It was... Tyler stopped. Don't explain it to me. I'm not asking for an explanation. I'm establishing that you understand what the footage shows. Blast looked at him steadily. You understand. Yes. And Devin Marsh has disclosed the prior incidents. Garrett Bradford, from the corner of the room where he'd positioned himself slightly back, slightly apart in a geometry that Blast noticed and interpreted correctly, said he disclosed two. Two that he was present for, Blast said. I'd like to know if there are others. The silence that followed was informative. Tyler, Blast's voice was unchanged. I need the complete picture, not the picture we'd like to present. The complete one. Everything I don't know coming from the other side later is 10 times worse than everything I know coming from you now. Tyler looked at his father. His father was looking at the wall. There was one other, Tyler said, in Chino Valley, about 2 years ago. Garrett Bradford closed his eyes, just for a second. Was it settled? Blast said. I don't dad handled it. Blast looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at the wall. And in the quality of that moment, a father unable to look at his son. A son who has just discovered that his father's inability to look at him is not protection, but something else entirely. Something shifted in the room that was not legal strategy and not public relations and not any of the machinery either of them had spent their lives trusting. Mr. Bradford, Blast said to Garrett, given what Devin Marsh has already disclosed and given what Tyler has just told me, I need to advise you separately from your son. There may be aspects of your knowledge and response to Tyler's conduct over the years that create your own legal exposure. He said it entirely without drama. I can represent Tyler or I can advise you on your situation, but I cannot do both. Do you understand? Garrett Bradford stood very still for a long moment. I understand, he said. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He picked up his phone. He looked at Tyler, his son, 23 years old, in a chair in an office in a building that bore his name. And Tyler looked back at him, and the thing in Tyler's eyes was not anger and not accusation and not even fear anymore. It was the specific look of someone who has just understood in a way that cannot be ununderstood that the protection they believed in was not protection at all, that it was a deal, that deals have terms, that when the terms become too costly, the deal changes. Garrett Bradford left the room. He walked down the stairs of the building and out the door and into the evening street. And he stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the town, his town, the one he'd shaped and managed and invested in and controlled the buildings and the roads and the relationships and the invisible infrastructure of obligation and reciprocity and carefully maintained imbalance. He stood in it and felt it around him, and for the first time in 30 years, he could not feel the edges of his own power in it, could not feel where his reach ended and where the thing reached back. He got in his car and drove home and did not call anyone. Emily didn't see the Bradford statement when it came out. Maya was screening her phone reasonably because the internet had found Emily Parker by 5 p.m. Not her location, not her room number, but her name, her story, the outline of her history with the foster system and the streets of Prescott Valley assembled by the combination of Kelly Park's reporting and the particular distributed research of people who become invested in a story and want to know all of it. What Maya read to her instead at 6:45 was a message from Sheriff Martinez's office relayed through Sarah Chen confirming that arrest warrants for Tyler Bradford and Ryan Calloway would be processed by the following morning and that the investigation into the prior incidents was being opened formally. Emily heard it and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "What about Marcus?" Sarah on the phone with Maya on speaker, Marcus Webb. He's retained an attorney as of an hour ago. Given Devin Marsh's cooperation, Marcus is likely to be offered a similar arrangement. What about Devin himself? What's his exposure? Lesser charges he was present, but there's no evidence he was physically involved in your assault. His cooperation combined with the prior incident disclosure puts him in a significantly reduced position. Sarah paused. Emily, I want to be clear, the charges against Tyler Bradford are the priority. Devin Marsh's cooperation made those charges airtight. Whether he faces additional consequences is a separate proceeding. And Garrett Bradford, The pause before Sarah answered was a fraction of a second longer than the others. The prior incident settlement and Garrett Bradford's role in arranging it is under review. That's a separate investigation. Martinez is running it. It's not part of your complaint directly, but it's downstream of it. Another pause. Emily, what you filed this morning in the complaint you decided to file, it's pulling threads that go further back than January 14th. Threads nobody has been allowed to pull before. Emily sat in the hospital bed and held this. Outside the window, the sky had gone fully dark. She could hear faintly the sound of engines. Some riders had stayed, were still there in the parking lot and on the street. Not 500 anymore, but there. Jack told me it was a debt, she said. When I first met him, he said the world owed me something for what I did. I remember, Maya said. I did not believe him. I thought it was something people say. She looked at the dark window. I still don't entirely think I did something that deserved all this. I just stepped in. I just got up when they knocked me down. I know, Maya said. But the camera saw it, Emily said. The camera saw everything. It saw me step in, and it saw what they did, and it saw Tyler come back. She was quiet for a moment. The camera saw what nobody was supposed to see. What they counted on, nobody seeing. Yes. So the debt, I don't think it's about me. I think it's about the camera. And Devin Marsh deciding the wall was cracking. And Sarah filing the subpoena fast enough. And Jack making calls at 11 p.m. from a parking lot. She paused. I was just the reason. Maya looked at her from the chair. You were the beginning, she said. That's not the same as just the reason. The beginning is everything. Without the beginning, none of the rest of it exists. At 7:30 p.m., Iron Jack came back to the hospital. He hadn't planned to. He'd been in the staging area managing the controlled departure of riders who needed to start the drive back, making sure every exit was clean and orderly, and gave no one anything to report. He'd been on his phone on his radio coordinating. He was tired in the way you're tired when the body is hurt and the mind has been running hard for 2 days, a tiredness that was not dramatic, but simply total all the way down. He stopped at the nurse's station and asked if Emily Parker's room was still accessible, and the night nurse, a man named Jerome, who had watched hundreds of Hell's Angels park in his lot that day and had decided to respond to this experience with the same equanimity he brought to everything else, said room 214 visitor hours technically over. But given the circumstances, he wasn't watching the clock. Iron Jack walked to room 214 and knocked twice, 2 quick raps. Maya's pattern, and heard Emily say, "Come in." She was sitting up. Maya was gone, had stepped out to make calls. Emily was alone in the lit room with the dark window and the sound of the last few engines settling outside. You look terrible, she said. You look considerably better than 48 hours ago, he said. He sat in the chair without asking. How are the ribs? Cracked. I know, mine too. He sat back. You heard about the warrants. Sarah called. And Devin Marsh's disclosure. Yes, she looked at him. There were 3 prior incidents, Jack, not 2. Tyler told his lawyer tonight a 3rd one in Chino Valley 2 years ago. His father handled it. Iron Jack's expression did not change exactly, but something in his eyes went very still. How do you know that? Ruiz texted Maya. Maya told me. She watched his face. You're angry. He stopped. He looked at the dark window. I'm thinking about the people from those 3 incidents. Who they were. Whether they're okay. He paused. Tyler Bradford has been doing this for at least 2 years. His father has been paying to make it go away for at least 2 years. And in all that time, nobody stepped in, Emily said. The words sat between them. Nobody stepped in, he said, until a 19-year-old girl with nothing to her name walked toward it in the dark. Emily looked at her hands. The left one still had a faint bruise across the knuckles from the asphalt. If I had known there were 3 other times, you didn't know, you couldn't have known. I know, but those people, she stopped. They were alone too. They had a settlement and an NDA and $47,000 and no one in their corner, and they stayed alone. They're not alone now, Iron Jack said. Martinez is finding them. Their stories are part of the investigation. What happened to them is on the record now. He looked at her. That's downstream of you, Emily, all of it. She shook her head slightly, not in disagreement, but in the way people shake their heads at things too large to hold all at once. I keep thinking about what happens after. To me, concretely what happens after. The room on Iron Springs Road, I don't know how long that's, as long as you need it. I don't know what I need. I've been the longest I've planned ahead for the past 14 months is 3 days. Where to be, what to eat, how to get through the week. I don't know how to think past that. You don't have to think past it tonight, he said. Tonight you did what you needed to do, Mao. The rest is it exists. It'll be there. But tonight it's enough to be here. She looked at him. This man, 61 years old, 2 cracked ribs, 37 years of a life she knew nothing about, who had handed her a card with a phone number and called it a debt and meant it. This man who had made 4 phone calls from an ER parking lot and set in motion something that 494 people had driven through the night to be part of. Iron Jack, she said. Yeah. Why did you stay? After the parking lot, why did you wait with me, walk me back, make the calls? Why not just you'd already thanked me? You could have. No, he said, I couldn't have. Why? He was quiet for a moment. He had the look of someone deciding whether to say a true thing or an easier thing. He chose the true thing. Because I've been in this world my whole life. I've seen what happens to people who step in when it costs them. What happens most of the time. He paused. Also was the time nobody shows up for them and they step in, they pay the price, and they go back to whatever they had before, except now they've got the price on top of it and nothing changed and nobody came. He looked at the window. I've watched that happen too many times. I was not going to let it happen to you. Emily said nothing for a moment. You didn't know me, she said finally. No, he agreed, but I knew what you did, and I knew what kind of person does that. He paused. The kind of person the world owes more to than it usually pays. The room was quiet, outside the last few engines. The mountain in the dark, the way mountains are in the dark present without being visible, holding their position simply because that is what mountains do. I want to find them, Emily said. Who? The people from the 3 other incidents. The ones who got the NDA and the check and nobody in their corner. She looked at him. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if they want to be found, but I want them to know that what happened to them is on the record now, that they're not alone anymore, even if it's late. She paused. Is that? I'll talk to Sarah, he said. It might complicate things legally. Sarah Chen is very good at complicated. Emily nodded slowly. She was exhausted, the specific exhaustion of someone who has been running on emergency reserves and has finally allowed the emergency to partially resolve and felt the full weight of every previous day drop into the present moment at once. Her eyes were heavy. Get some sleep, Iron Jack said, standing carefully. You too. I'm heading back to Iron Springs Road. Maya left a key. He paused at the door. Emily, tomorrow is going to be a lot. Media, probably. Martinez's people. More legal process. It's going to be a lot. I know. But today, he stopped. He looked for the right word and found it. Today was right. What you decided today. How you handled it. He nodded once the way he nodded. You did good. She looked at him from the bed. This girl who had counted her money and her days and her resources for 14 months and held onto numbers. Because numbers were the only solid things who had walked toward a thing in the dark. Because she couldn't not, who had gotten up when they knocked her down, because the alternative was staying down, and staying down was dying by degrees, and she was not finished yet. Okay, she said. He left. She lay back carefully facing the dark window and let her eyes close, and outside the parking lot, the last few engines went quiet one by one, and the night settled over Prescott Valley, the way the night always settled over the buildings and the roads, and the invisible infrastructure of a town, in the process of being different than it had been, the change not complete, but irreversible. The way certain changes are, once they've been named out loud and put on the record, and seen by a camera, and carried through the night by 500 engines, and filed in a complaint that was already pulling threads that went further back than anyone had known. The Bradfords were not finished. The machine had not simply stopped. It was slowing, it was seizing, but the men inside it were still making decisions, and the decisions still had consequences, and the morning would bring more of everything. Tyler Bradford would have his day in front of a judge. Garrett Bradford would have a conversation with an investigator that he would not be able to manage the way he'd managed every other conversation. The other 3 incidents would surface in the news by the end of the week, and the people who had taken the settlements would have to decide, each of them, what they wanted to do with the fact that the wall had cracked. All of that was true. All of that was coming. But tonight the girl slept, and the riders who had come from Phoenix and Tucson and Flagstaff and Kingman and Wickenburg drove home through the desert dark with a specific feeling of people who have done the right thing and know it, which is a feeling that does not announce itself loudly, but sits in the sternum the whole way home and does not leave. She woke before the alarm. The ceiling was the same ceiling. The mountain was still there through the window. She'd moved back to Iron Springs Road the morning after the hospital, Sarah Chen having confirmed there was no medical reason to stay, and the room above the garage had received her back the way rooms do when they've been slept in once and already have the shape of you in them. She lay still for a moment doing the assessment. Ribs present, insistent 3 weeks into healing and behaving the way 3-week-old cracks behave. Not the sharp immediate pain of the first days, but a deep territorial ache that showed up whenever she forgot to be careful. Knee better, face completely healed, the split lip gone smooth, the bruise long faded. She was counting again. Not money this time. Days. 22 days since the parking lot. 22 days since she had walked towards something in the dark because she couldn't not. And the world had unexpectedly, loudly in ways she was still processing, walked back. Her phone showed 6:15 a.m. and 4 unread messages. One from Sarah Chen, one from Maya. One from a number she didn't recognize with an Arizona area code, and one from Iron Jack that said only today. You ready? She typed back yes. She wasn't entirely sure that was true, but she'd been saying yes to things for 3 weeks that she wasn't entirely sure about, and each time the ground had held under the word, so she kept saying it. Chidrum. The arraignment of Tyler Bradford was scheduled for 9 a.m. at the Yavapai County Courthouse, and by 7:30 the block around the building had the particular energy of a place where something significant is about to happen. Journalists with equipment, people who had no official reason to be there, but who had followed the story and felt entitled to witness its next chapter, and along the perimeter orderly and visible, and entirely silent 30 riders in Hell's Angels vests who had driven in the night before and parked and were simply there. Not 500 this time, 30. But 30, Iron Jack had said to Ruiz, was the right number for a courthouse. 500 was the right number to show a town what caring looked like. 30 was the right number to show a courtroom what memory looked like. Emily was not at the courthouse. This had been Sarah Chen's advice and Emily's decision, which converged for different reasons. Sarah's was strategic. The defendant's team would attempt to characterize Emily's presence as harassment or intimidation, and giving them that tool was not useful, and Emily's was personal. She had spent 22 days being careful and strategic and processing everything in the way that people process things when the processing has legal and public stakes, and she was tired of being careful in ways that were about managing other people's narratives. She chose not to be at the courthouse because she did not want to sit in a room with Tyler Bradford and perform the particular stoicism that the situation would require of her, and that was enough reason. She was at Dr. Vasquez's clinic instead for her 3-week follow-up, where Vasquez pressed along the ribs and checked the knee and told her the crack was healing cleanly, and asked again if she was eating regularly. Emily told her yes, which was true. Now, which was still occasionally startling to her, the regularness of it, the fact of 3 meals, the fact of a kitchen with a 2-burner stove and food in it that Maya or Jack or one of the others had made sure was there. You look different than 3 weeks ago, Vasquez said. I'm less beaten up. That's part of it. Vasquez looked at her with the clinical directness that Emily had come to recognize as her version of warmth. The other part is harder to name. You look like someone who stopped waiting for the floor to drop out. Emily thought about that. She thought about 14 months of countings of managing risk in 3-day increments of the specific vigilance of someone who knows that the ground under them is not reliable and has calibrated every decision around that knowledge. She thought about whether the floor had stopped dropping or whether she had simply slowly, incrementally, without any single moment she could point to, started to believe it might hold. I'm working on it, she said. Vasquez patted her arm once briefly. Good enough, she said. Damn. At 9:03 a.m. Tyler Bradford walked into courtroom 7 of the Yavapai County Courthouse, and the sound of the room changed in the way that rooms change when a person who has been the subject of 22 days of public conversation finally becomes physically present. He was wearing a jacket and tie, which Howard Blass had specified. He was 23 years old, and it looked every year of it, which was a thing that had not been true 3 weeks ago. when he had moved through the world with the ease of someone who has never needed to look their age, because age implies accountability. And accountability had always been someone else's problem. Blass was beside him. Garrett Bradford was not in the room. This was notable. Garrett Bradford had appeared at every public function related to Tyler for Tyler's entire life: games, graduations, hearings. When there had been hearings, the subtle theater of parental support that communicated in small towns, the weight of the family standing behind the individual. His absence today was not because he was uninformed or unable to attend. It was because Howard Blass had advised him firmly and with the authority of someone who had been doing this for 30 years, that Garrett Bradford, sitting behind his son in a courtroom, while his own conduct was under active investigation by the same sheriff's office, was not a useful image. Garrett Bradford was at home. Tyler looked at the room without his father in it and felt a particular vertigo of someone who has always had a fixed point and whose fixed point has moved. The arraignment itself was procedurally brief. Judge Patricia Holloway, 68, who had been on the Yavapai County bench for 19 years and who had seen the Bradford name appear in various contexts over those 19 years in the specific background way that powerful names appear in small jurisdictions, read the charges. Tyler Bradford aggravated assault robbery, and the charge that had been added following Devin Marsh's testimony and the disclosure of the prior incidents. One count of felony assault relating to an incident 9 months prior, in which the second victim, a 24-year-old man named Carlos Reyes, who was no relation to Maya, had taken a settlement in an NDA and $47,000 and gone quiet. Carlos Reyes had decided 3 days earlier to not go quiet anymore. He had called Sarah Chen's office himself, having seen the story, having read about Emily Parker in Kelly Park's reporting, having sat with the NDA for 9 months with the specific weight of someone who signed something to make a terrible thing go away and had watched it not go away inside himself. Sarah Chen had connected him with a separate attorney because her representation of Emily created a conflict. That attorney had filed a motion to void the NDA on grounds of public interest and victim rights within 48 hours. Garrett Bradford's machine had generated the NDA. Garrett Bradford's machine had processed the $47,000. The motion to void it named Garrett Bradford as a party. When the charges against Tyler were read aloud and Carlos Reyes's name appeared in them, the room made a sound, not loud, more like a collective breath, the sound of people hearing something they'd suspected and are now hearing confirmed. Tyler Bradford entered a plea of not guilty and was released on a bail amount that Howard Blass had negotiated down from what Martinez's office had requested, and that was still given the Bradfords' resources, not a genuine constraint. He walked out of the courtroom and down the courthouse steps and past the 30 riders in the parking lot, and none of them moved. None of them said anything. None of them looked away. He got into Blass's car and did not look back. Sarah Chen called Emily at 9:47 with the arraignment summary. Emily listened and asked 3 questions: the bail amount, the trial date, and whether Carlos Reyes was all right. "He's holding up," Sarah said. "He was nervous about coming forward. He's been nervous about everything for 9 months. But he called me himself, Emily. He saw your name, and he called." She paused. That matters. When someone who has been quiet that long decides to speak, it means they've found something to stand on. You were part of what he found. Emily sat with this. She was back at Iron Springs Road by then, sitting at the small kitchen table with coffee that she had made herself on the 2-burner stove, which was still a novelty. The making of her own coffee in her own kitchen, being a novelty of the kind that people who have always had it cannot fully appreciate, and people who have been without it feel in their hands every time. "What's his situation?" she said. "Carlos. Where is he?" "He's been in Flagstaff. He took the settlement money and used most of it on medical bills and the rest on getting out of Prescott Valley. He's been working in a restaurant." A pause. "He didn't want to be here. He wanted to be somewhere Tyler Bradford wasn't." "I understand that." "I know you do." Emily looked at the table. "Is there something I can do? Specifically, not abstractly, specifically, is there something I can do to help him through this?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "He knows your name. He knows your story. I think, and this is not legal advice, this is personal observation, I think if you wanted to reach out to him through his attorney just to say you see him, it would matter. It's not nothing coming forward. It costs something. Having someone acknowledge that it costs something is not nothing. Give me his attorney's number." I'll send it now. Emily wrote the number on the back of a receipt from the grocery store Maya had taken her to on day 4, which was the first time she had been inside a grocery store in 14 months, and had stood in the cereal aisle for 2 full minutes, overwhelmed by the specific abundance of it, before Maya had gently steered her toward the cart and said, "Just pick the one you want." And Emily had stood there, understanding that she was allowed to want something and being surprised by how long it took to remember how. She looked at the number on the receipt. She put it in her phone under C. Raya's attorney. She would call this afternoon. The story of what Garrett Bradford knew and when he knew it broke publicly at noon on a Thursday, 12 days after the arraignment, through a piece in the Arizona Republic that Kelly Park had contributed to alongside their own investigative team. It was 42 paragraphs. It named the 3 prior incidents, all 3 victims, now on record. Carlos Reyes, openly, the other 2 with their identities protected at their request. It named the settlement amounts $47,000, $23,000, $31,000. It documented the timeline, Tyler Bradford's pattern stretching back 2.5 years, each incident followed within days by a call to Garrett Bradford's office, followed by Phil Greaves making contact with the victim's family, followed by the check in the paperwork. It also included a detail that came from Devin Marsh's expanded cooperation statement, which he had provided to Martinez in exchange for reduced charges. Garrett Bradford had attended in person, the meeting at which the first settlement was negotiated. He had sat in a room with a frightened young person and the frightened young person's mother and Phil Greaves, and had personally offered the check and the paperwork and the reassurance that this was the best way forward for everyone. And then he had gone home, and Tyler Bradford had gone home, and 11 months later, Tyler Bradford had done it again. The piece did not call Garrett Bradford a criminal. It presented the documented sequence and let it sit. The sequence sat badly. By 2 p.m., the piece had been shared nationally. By 4 p.m., Garrett Bradford's office had released a statement through Greaves, not blast Greaves, which signaled clearly that Garrett was now managing his own exposure separately from his son's. That was 7 sentences of carefully legalistic language that said essentially nothing. It did not deny anything that was in the piece. It disputed nothing specifically. It was the statement of a man whose machine had been running on the principle that nothing would ever need to be specifically denied because nothing would ever be specifically confirmed, and the machine was finding that the principle no longer applied. At 5 p.m., Sheriff Martinez announced that the investigation into Garrett Bradford's role in the prior settlements had been expanded and that additional charges were under review. Patricia Okafor, the city council member, released her own statement at 5:30, a real one, not a political navigation. She called for Garrett Bradford's resignation from the city council pending the outcome of the investigation. She was the first. By 7 p.m., 2 other council members had added their names to the call. Garrett Bradford resigned from the city council at 8:47 p.m. through Greaves without comment. Iron Jack called Emily when he heard. "You saw it?" he said. "I saw it. Council resignation. I saw that too." She was at the window, the one with the mountain, her window, and the mountain was in the last of the day's light, going golden gray at once. Martinez is expanding the investigation. It's going to take a long time. Trials take a long time. They do. Sarah told me the trial date is 7 months out, maybe more. Howard Blass is going to file motions continuances. Sarah will hold the line. I know. She paused. I've been thinking about what I do for 7 months. While it all moves, what I do at the time. What have you been thinking? She had been thinking specifically about a conversation she'd had 4 days earlier with a woman named Donna Ferretti, who ran a nonprofit called Bridge House out of a building on Miller Valley Road, transitional housing and support services for young people aging out of foster care. Donna had called Emily directly, having gotten her number from Sarah Chen with Emily's permission, and had talked to her for 40 minutes about the organization and its work and its needs, and toward the end of the call about whether Emily had any interest in being involved. Not as a client, Donna had said carefully, as someone who has been through the system and come out the other side, who could speak to the experience in ways that policy people and grant writers and well-meaning advocates couldn't, as someone whose presence might mean something to the people Bridge House served. Emily had said she'd think about it. She'd been thinking about it for 4 days. There's an organization, she told Iron Jack, Transitional Housing Foster Care Kids Aging Out. The woman who runs it called me. She wants me to be, I don't know exactly what the title would be, peer advocate maybe, someone who talks to the young people coming through, Someone who's been where they've been. Iron Jack was quiet for a moment. That's good work. I never finished high school. Jack, I have a GED. I got it 16 in a group home because the program required it. I don't have any training in social work or counseling or you have 14 months of living it, he said, and 3 weeks of watching what happens when you refuse to stay invisible. He paused. Emily, the people that organization serves, what do you think they need more, a master's degree or someone who got up when they were knocked down? She looked at the mountain. I'd need to figure out income. I can't. There's a stipend, Iron Jack said, which told her he had already talked to Donna Ferretti, which she found she was not surprised by. You called her, Emily said. She called me first, actually. She's been watching the story. She wanted to know if I thought you'd be open to it. A pause. I told her I thought you'd argue. I'm not arguing. You were about to. I was processing. That's what arguing looks like when you're being polite about it. She heard something in his voice that was close to warmth, the specific warmth of someone who has been watching a person find their footing and is choosing not to make a scene of it. There's also something else, about school. What about school? Sarah Chen went to the University of Arizona. She knows people in the admissions office. There are programs for non-traditional students, people who didn't go the standard route for any number of reasons. She's willing to make a call. Emily held the phone. She was standing at the window and the mountain was going dark, and she was counting again. Not money, not days, but something that didn't have a number yet. Something that was the shape of a future she had not allowed herself to think about. Because thinking about the future when you didn't have a floor to stand on was a form of torture, was hope with nowhere to land, and she had learned to not do it. She was allowing herself carefully to start doing it. University, she said. Social work maybe, or public policy, or law. Sarah says you have the mind for it, and she does not say that to people she doesn't mean it about. He paused. You don't have to decide anything tonight. You don't have to decide anything for a while. I'm just telling you the doors exist. I never knew they existed for me. I know. His voice was quiet. That was the failure. Not yours, the system's. The thing that should have told you those doors were there didn't tell you, and then it threw you out and expected you to find them anyway. He paused. We're trying to fix that. Bridge House is one piece of it. Donna has been doing this work for 12 years, and she's very good at it. But she said, and I'm telling you this because I think you should hear it, she said she's never had someone come to her whose story had this kind of reach, who'd been seen the way you've been seen. I don't want to be a story, Emily said. It came out sharper than she intended. I don't want to be the girl who got beat up and 500 bikers came. I don't want that to be what I am. It's not what you are, he said immediately. It's something that happened to you. You are the person who got up. You are the person who filed the complaint and found Carlos Reyes and is standing at a window right now, figuring out what comes next. A pause. The story is how people found you. What you do now is who you are. She stood at the window for a long moment. Okay, she said. Okay, what? Okay, I'll talk to Donna. I'll talk to Sarah about the university program. She paused. And Jack, I found something about the photograph. He went still on the line. She could feel the stillness of it. Tell me. Maya helped me. We contacted the photo booth company. It was a chain called Snap and Go. They had locations and truck stops across the Southwest. They still exist, and they digitized their records in 2018. The booth in Kingman was in their system. She stopped. Her throat was doing the thing it had wanted to do on day one in the alley when Maya said someone should have been showing up for you for a while now. The thing she'd stopped, then the thing she'd been stopping ever since, because stopping it was the discipline that had kept her functional for 14 months. She let it happen. Just briefly. Just enough. The photograph is in their database. It's retrievable. For $30, they'll send a digital copy. Emily, I have $30, she said. I have way more than $30 now. Maya advanced me 2 weeks of the Bridge House stipend, which she wasn't supposed to do but did. So I have money and I'm going to pay $30 and get the photograph back. She stopped. I just wanted to tell you. I don't know why. I know why, he said gently. Because it matters. Because it's the thing you lost that wasn't about the ribs or the money. And getting it back matters. She wiped her face with the back of her hand once quickly and looked at the mountain. I'm going to order it tonight, she said. Good. Sorry, good. The photograph arrived as a digital file 11 days later. Emily printed it at the library on Glassford Hill Road, the same library she had spent 2 hours in every day for 14 months, the same library where the security guard's shift change had determined how long she could stay warm. She used the library's color printer, which cost 25 cents per page, and she held the printed photograph in her hands for a moment in the library lobby and looked at her mother's face. The real laugh, the one below the performance. She had been trying to locate Diane Parker for 3 weeks through channels that Sarah Chen had helped her access, not law enforcement channels, not anything that would cause harm or force an interaction. Diane wasn't ready for just a network of treatment facilities and social services and peer outreach workers that existed in the gaps between the official systems, the people who knew where people were when the official systems didn't. She didn't have a location yet. She might not get one. Her mother might not be findable in the way that finding required cooperation from the person being found. But she had the photograph. She had the real laugh preserved. She had evidence that the laugh had existed, that she and her mother had stood in a photo booth in Kingman when Emily was 7 and made ridiculous faces at a camera, and both of them had been genuinely, briefly, completely happy. She put the photograph in her new backpack, not the one she'd started with, that was gone, but the one Maya had taken her to buy on day 5 at a store on Robert Road, a proper backpack in dark green that had multiple compartments and a chest strap, and was by any functional measure a better backpack than the one she'd lost. She put the photograph in the front pocket. She walked out of the library into the February sun. The preliminary hearing for Tyler Bradford happened 6 weeks after the arraignment. Howard Blass had filed 3 motions in the interim, all of which Judge Holloway had considered and denied with the particular efficiency of a judge who had read the evidence file and formed a view. The footage from Rosario's was admitted. Devin Marsh's statement was admitted. The medical documentation from Vasquez in the hospital was admitted. The prior incidents having survived a challenge from Blass on relevance grounds were admitted as pattern evidence. Carlos Reyes was in the courtroom for the preliminary hearing. He had driven down from Flagstaff 4 hours early morning, arriving before the hearing started, and sitting in the back row with his attorney and his hands folded in his lap. He was 25 now, quiet-faced with the specific stillness of someone who has spent a long time managing a thing internally and is only recently learning to let it exist in the external world. Emily was there too this time. She and Carlos had spoken twice on the phone by then, and once in person. He'd come to Prescott Valley the week before to meet Sarah Chen and had stopped at Iron Springs Road for an hour at Emily's invitation. And they had sat in her kitchen and drunk coffee and been mostly quiet together in the way that people who have survived the same category of thing are sometimes quiet, not because there's nothing to say, but because the presence of someone who understands is itself the thing that needed saying. He had looked at the room above the garage, the bed and the bathroom and the small kitchen and the window with the mountain, and he had not said anything about it for a moment. Then he'd said, "It's good," in a voice that Emily understood to mean that he was glad she had it and that it cost him something to be glad because he had not had it and that he was choosing to be glad anyway. She had said, "I'm going to talk to Donna about you at Bridge House. There's a need for people who've been through it. She can use you if you want to be used." He had looked at her. "I'm not a story either," he said, directly watching her face. "I know," she said. "Neither of us is. We're just people who got through it and stayed honest about how." She paused. "That's the rarest thing a Bridge House has." According to Donna, he'd left without committing to anything. 3 days later, he'd called Donna Ferretti. In the courtroom at the preliminary hearing, Emily sat 3 rows back on the left side and watched Tyler Bradford's back. He was in the jacket and tie again. He was 23 years old, and he had Howard Blass beside him and his father's money in the bail account, but not his father in the room. And he had the footage on record, and Devin Marsh's statement on record, and Carlos Reyes in the back row. And he was starting to understand in the specific way that understanding arrives for people who have spent their lives inside force fields, that the field was gone. The hearing lasted 2 hours and 15 minutes. Judge Holloway set the trial date for 8 months out. One continuance had already been granted and denied Blass's motion for a change of venue, which he'd argued on grounds of local prejudice, and which she denied on grounds that the prejudice, if it existed, was toward the defendant's conduct rather than toward the defendant personally. A distinction she articulated with the precision of someone who has been on the bench long enough to not need to perform confidence. When it was over, Emily walked out of the courthouse and down the steps and into the parking lot, and Iron Jack was there beside his bike because he'd been there the whole time, waiting in the way he waited, without display, without needing acknowledgement, simply present. She walked up to him and stood beside him and looked at the courthouse. 8 months, she said. 7 maybe, if Blast doesn't get another continuance. And Garrett Bradford. Martinez's office briefed me this morning. They're looking at criminal facilitation charges. The settlement meeting, the one where he was personally present, that's the anchor. Phil Greaves has been cooperating separately. He paused. Greaves is not a bad man, Emily. He's a man who made accommodations over a long time and is now accounting for them. Most people aren't entirely one thing, she said. He looked at her sideways. When did you decide that? I think I always knew it. I had to stay simple to survive. Everything was a calculation. This person is safe, this one isn't. This thing is true, this one isn't. She paused. I have room to think more complicated now. He nodded, the slow, considered nod. That's a good sign. Jack, she turned toward him. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, not the way you answer things when you're trying to manage how I feel. He raised an eyebrow. I don't manage how you feel. You absolutely manage how you deliver information to me. It's kind, I appreciate it, but I want the honest version of this. He looked at her for a moment. Ask. All of this, the 500 writers, the camera Devin Marsh cooperating in the national story, Garrett Bradford resigning from the council, the investigation opening. All of it. She held his gaze. Would any of it have happened if it had been someone else in that parking lot? Someone who wasn't homeless? Someone who had people who had a voice who didn't have my specific... She stopped. Would the system have moved this fast for someone else? The question sat between them in the February morning. Iron Jack looked at the courthouse for a long moment. Then he looked at her. No, he said. Probably not. Because of you. Because of us. Because of the network. Because of how the story moved. Because of the footage. Because of you, she said again. Not as accusation, but as precision. You made the calls. You were the reason the story had weight. If it had been a different man in that parking lot, if it had been a man without 37 years in a network and the specific credibility you carry, the same girl gets up and steps in and gets beaten. And the Bradford's machine handles it like it handled the other 3. He didn't deny it. Yes, he said quietly. So what does that say? It says the system is broken, he said. It says who you know and who sees you and who has the ability to make noise on your behalf determines what justice you get. It says, Emily, I know what it says. I've known what it says for a long time. What happened to you should not have required me. What happened to Carlos should not have required you. The other 2 should not have needed any of this. They should have filed a complaint and had it taken seriously the first time by the police, by the prosecutor, without cameras and 500 writers in a national news story. But it did require all of that. This time it required all of that. He looked at her, which is why the work matters. Bridge House, Carlos talking to Donna, you talking to the university. Not because it fixes everything, it doesn't, not quickly, but because every person who gets through and has room to turn around and reach back changes the math slightly. Slightly. He paused. It took 500 riders to get this town to see what was right in front of it. Maybe someday it takes 200. Maybe someday it takes 10. Maybe someday it takes one person filing a complaint and the system responding the way it's supposed to. He was quiet for a moment. I won't see that day. You might. Emily stood in the February morning outside the courthouse with the photograph in her backpack, and the cracked rib 3 weeks from fully healed, and the trial 8 months out, and everything else, the university application that Sarah had helped her begin, the first day at Bridge House, scheduled for the following Monday, Carlos Reyes driving back to Flagstaff right now, with Donna Ferretti's business card in his pocket, 30 riders who had come in last night and were leaving this afternoon, a room above a garage with a window and a mountain, and she let all of it be present at once, which she was learning to do, was practicing, was not good at yet, but was practicing. I ordered the photograph, she said. My mother, the one from the photo booth in Kingman. I know, you told me. I printed it. I have it in my backpack. She touched the strap. I think I'm going to try to find her again. My mother. Not to fix anything. I know I can't fix it. Not to... I just don't want her to be alone without knowing I'm not alone anymore. Iron Jack said nothing for a moment. That's a brave thing, he said, or a stupid one. Sometimes they're the same. He straightened from where he'd been leaning against the bike. You want to get breakfast? She laughed, a real one, the kind that didn't need the cracked ribs permission. You always ask me that when the serious part is over. The serious part is never over. Breakfast is still necessary. They walked together to the truck. Maya's truck, because Maya had given Emily the keys that morning, with the tone of someone who has decided a thing and is not interested in discussion. And Emily drove because she was learning to drive, was 3 weeks into learning, was considerably better than she'd been on day one, when she'd lurched out of a parking lot, and Maya had gripped the door handle and said nothing about it. She drove, and Iron Jack rode beside her, and the mountains were there, and the town was there. The town that was different than it had been in ways that were real and incomplete and ongoing. The way real change is always real and incomplete and ongoing, the way justice works when it actually works. Not as a single moment, but as a direction, a slow turning toward something better that requires everyone who can reach to reach, and everyone who can hold to hold, and everyone who can say, I couldn't not to say it, and walk forward. On a Monday morning in early March, Emily Parker walked through the door of Bridge House on Miller Valley Road for the first time in her official capacity. Donna Ferretti met her at the entrance, small, warm, practical, with the particular energy of someone who has been doing essential work for a long time and has made peace with the fact that essential work is always unfinished. Ready? Donna said. I'm going to say yes, Emily said. Donna smiled. That's the right answer. Inside the building was ordinary functional furniture, a common room, a kitchen that smelled like coffee and someone's attempt at baking a bulletin board full of information and resources, and a few photographs of people who'd come through and gone on. The people currently in residence were mostly her age or younger, mostly moving through the disorienting experience of being in a system and then not being in a system and trying to figure out what came next. Some of them had been there for days, some for months. They wore the particular look she recognized not on the surface of their faces but underneath, in the way they held their bodies of people who have learned to take up as little space as possible and are slowly, carefully, not entirely trustingly being told that more space is available. She recognized them because she had been them. She sat in the common room that first morning and talked to a girl named Priya who was 17 and had been in 4 foster homes and spoke with the careful precision of someone who has learned to give exactly as much information as is required and no more because information has always been a vulnerability. Emily listened. She did not perform understanding. She did not apply the language of the resources list. She just listened and asked one question at a time and let the space be as large as it needed to be. At some point, Priya said, "How long were you on the street?" 14 months, Emily said. Priya looked at her. "And you're okay now?" Emily thought about what okay meant. She thought about the cracked rib, the photograph in the backpack, the trial 8 months out, the university application that might or might not succeed the mother she hadn't found yet, the floor that she was learning to believe might hold, even though she couldn't always feel it. "I'm working on it," she said. "Every day I'm working on it." "Does it get better?" "Yes," Emily said. Not as comfort, not as performance, as a fact she had evidence for. It gets better, not all at once, not without cost, but yes, it gets better. Priya looked at her for a long moment with the specific assessment of someone who has been lied to enough to have calibrated the difference, who can hear the frequency of a true thing versus a performed one. Then she nodded small and looked at her hands. That nod was the thing Emily carried home that evening. Not the trial, not the investigation, not the national story that had finally stopped updating daily and settled into the slow burn of ongoing legal process. Not the 500 riders or the camera or the courtroom. That nod, the small assent of a frightened 17-year-old who decided provisionally, carefully, not yet fully but enough to believe that a true thing was true. Iron Jack called at 7 p.m. "First day," he said. "How was it?" "Good," she said. And then, because she was learning to be more precise and less automatic about the word actually good, not fine good, real good. "Yeah." There's a girl named Priya, she said. She asked me if it gets better. What did you tell her? The truth. Emily stood at her window. The mountain going dark, the light that lasted longer now that February was becoming March, the extra minutes at the end of the day that accumulate until one morning you notice the dark has moved back and the world has more room in it. I told her yes. She meant it. She had proof of it standing there in a room above a garage with a mountain in the window, in a photograph in her backpack, in a cracked rib, in its final weeks of healing, in a trial pending, in a future she was building day by careful day out of the material of everything that had tried to unmake her. She had been invisible. She had been seen. She had stepped toward a thing in the dark because she couldn't not, and the world had imperfectly, loudly, slowly, incompletely decided not to look away. That was real. That was the ground under everything. And Emily Parker, who had counted her money and her days and her resources for 14 months and survived by making herself small enough to fit in the cracks of a world that had forgotten her, was done being small. She was 19 years old and she was just beginning, and she was never going to stand alone again.